Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It happened back in October '75, and to this day, I still get cold sweats thinking about it. I've only told this story to a handful of people, and most think I'm either crazy or that I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know something was out there that shouldn't have been. My buddy Lance and I had been planning this deer hunting trip for months. We'd heard the Green Peaks Wilderness in Arizona was prime hunting territory, relatively untouched compared to the more popular spots. Lance had a cousin who'd bagged a 10-pointer there the previous season, so we figured we'd try our luck. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, set up camp near an old firebreak road that cut through the area. Nothing fancy, just our two-man tents, a fire pit, and our gear. The first night went fine. We grilled some steaks, had a few beers, and turned in early. The plan was to get a full day of hunting in on Saturday. The morning was crisp, that perfect fall chill that makes you zip your jacket up to your chin but doesn't freeze your fingers when you're trying to handle your rifle. After breakfast, we decided to split up to cover more ground. Lance wanted to head toward the base of the peak where there was a natural spring that might attract deer. I chose to follow the old firebreak trail that led into a wide canyon. "Meet back at camp by 4, Lance said as we parted ways, "and try not to shoot yourself." That was the last normal moment of the trip. I hiked for about 2 hours, moving slow and quiet like my dad taught me. The firebreak opened into a canyon with steep ridges on either side. Perfect hunting territory, good visibility across the valley floor, plenty of cover for deer, and I could position myself up on the ridge for a clean shot. I found a good spot on a flat rock overlooking the canyon floor. The sun was high now, warming my back through my hunting jacket. I scanned the area with my binoculars, spotted a few signs of deer, fresh droppings, some trampled grass near a small creek at the bottom of the canyon. I settled in to wait. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks. But then it came again, a woman's scream. Not just any scream, the kind that makes your blood freeze. High-pitched, desperate, filled with terror. It echoed off the canyon walls, coming from somewhere on the opposite ridge about half a mile away. Before I could even process what I was hearing, another sound joined in, a roar that I immediately recognized as a bear. But not just any bear sound. This wasn't a warning growl or even a normal aggressive roar. This was the sound of a bear in a life-or-death battle, filled with rage and fear. I stood up, my rifle ready, scanning the ridge where the sounds came from. I expected to hear gunshots, someone defending themselves from the bear attack, but there was nothing. Just that terrible scream, the bear's roar, and then silence. The silence was almost worse than the screams. I kept my eyes fixed on that spot across the canyon, and that's when I saw it. A brown bear, full-grown, at least 400 pounds, bursting out of the tree line on the opposite ridge. But it wasn't charging, it was running away. And not just moving quickly, this bear was in full-blown panic mode, scrambling down the side of the ridge like its life depended on it. Bears don't run like that unless something truly terrifying is after them. My first thought was that someone was hurt. The woman who screamed could be badly mauled or worse. I had a first aid kit in my pack, and even though every instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there, I couldn't just leave someone injured. I made my way across the canyon floor and up the opposite ridge, moving as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every few steps I'd stop and listen, but there was nothing, just the whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional bird call. When I reached the area where I thought the confrontation had occurred, what I found made no sense. There was blood on the ground, fresh and bright red. Tufts of brown fur, bear fur, were scattered around. The ground was torn up like something had been dragging heavy objects. But there was no body, no injured woman, no dead bear. Then I noticed the blood trail, small droplets leading away from the disturbed area, heading deeper into the woods. Against every natural survival instinct, I followed it. The trail led about 50 yards through dense underbrush to a natural rock formation, a kind of shallow cave with a pit in the center, like something had scooped out the earth. What I saw in that pit will haunt me until the day I die. 6 female deer carcasses stacked neatly on top of each other. All of them were mostly intact, except for one detail that made my skin crawl. Every single one had its head removed, not torn off, not chewed away, cleanly removed, like something had deliberately decapitated them. 5 of the carcasses looked like they'd been there for different lengths of time, some maybe a day old, others beginning to rot. But the 6th one, the one on top, was fresh. The blood was still wet, still dripping down onto the others. Whatever had killed this deer had done so within the last hour, maybe even during the confrontation with the bear. That's when the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was standing in something's food cache. Some predator was storing its kills here, and whatever it was powerful enough to scare off a full-grown brown bear. And if the fresh kill was any indication, it was nearby, maybe watching me right now. I backed away from the pit, trying not to make any sudden movements. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of my rifle. Every sound in the forest, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat. Once, I was about 20 yards from the pit. I turned and started moving as fast as I could back toward the firebreak road, no longer caring about being quiet. I just wanted to get back to the truck, find Lance, and get the hell out of there. I was about halfway down the ridge when I heard it, movement in the brush to my left, paralleling my path. Something was following me, staying just out of sight in the tree line, something big enough to make the underbrush crack and sway. I didn't stop to look. I didn't call out. I just ran. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like rubber, but pure fear kept me moving. Whatever was following me seemed to be toying with me, sometimes getting ahead, sometimes falling behind, but always just out of sight. I could hear its movement, smell an odd, musky odor on the wind, but I never caught more than a glimpse of something dark moving through the trees. When I finally broke out onto the firebreak road, I nearly collapsed with relief. About a quarter mile down the road, I could see our campsite and the outline of our truck, and thank God, Lance was there, loading something into the back. "Lance!" I screamed, sprinting toward him. "Start the truck! Start the goddamn truck!" I've never seen a man move so fast. Maybe it was the panic in my voice or the wild look in my eyes, but Lance didn't ask questions. He jumped into the driver's seat and had the engine running by the time I reached the campsite. I threw myself into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and locked it. "Go! Drive! Now!" I was gasping for breath, unable to form complete sentences. Lance floored it, the truck fishtailing on the dirt road before the tires caught. "What the hell happened? Were you shot at? Did you see a mountain lion?" I couldn't even begin to explain. All I could do was keep looking out the back window, watching the tree line for any sign of pursuit. We left everything, our tents, our cooking gear, most of our supplies. Didn't even think about going back. And for them, it wasn't until we hit the main highway that I started to calm down enough to tell Lance what had happened. He listened without interrupting, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You think whatever killed those deer was what scared off the bear?" he finally asked. "Had to be," I said, "and I think it was following me all the way back to camp." "But what about the woman's scream?" That was the part that kept nagging at me. There had been no sign of any human victim, no backpack, no gear, no body, just that terrible scream, and then the bear. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe there wasn't any woman. Maybe that's what it sounds like. We drove straight through the night, not stopping until we were 2 counties away. We filed a report with the Forest Service, but they didn't take us seriously. Said it was probably just a territorial dispute between predators, maybe a mountain lion and a bear. Said the deer were likely mountain lion kills that the bear was trying to steal. But mountain lions don't stack their kills. They don't remove heads with surgical precision. And they sure as hell don't scare off brown bears 3 times their size. It's been 47 years since that day in the Green Peaks wilderness. I've never been back, never been hunting again either. Sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear that scream in my head, that terrible human-like scream that wasn't human at all. And I wonder how many other hunters have stumbled across something's feeding ground in those remote woods, and how many of them didn't make it back to their trucks. Whatever lives in those mountains, it's still out there, hunting, feeding, waiting, and nobody believes me. Story 2. I still can't believe it's been 24 years since it happened. I was only 10 years old back in '99, but I remember every detail like it. It was yesterday. Some things you just can't forget, no matter how much time passes. We lived on this small farm outside Haydenville, Ohio. Nothing fancy, just a simple 2-story farmhouse with a few outbuildings, surrounded by fields that backed up to dense woods. My dad worked the land during the day and picked up mechanic work when he could. Mum homeschooled my sisters Emma and Sarah and my younger brothers. That evening in late October started like any other. The air had that crisp fall feeling, and the sun was setting earlier. Dad had just finished painting the front porch that afternoon, so we were all using the back door. After dinner, Dad asked me to take some water out to our dog, Wolf. He was a German Shepherd mix, big, but the sweetest dog you'd ever meet. We usually kept him tied up in the front yard on a long lead, so he could move around but not wander off. "Jim, take this bucket out to Wolf," Dad said, handing me the water. "Just go around through the back since the paint's still wet." I remember feeling grown up being trusted with this chore alone, as it was getting dark. I took the bucket and headed out the back door. The yard was dimly lit by the light coming from the kitchen window, and I could hear Wolf's chain jingling in the distance as he probably heard me coming. I had only taken about 10 steps from the back door when I felt something different. It's hard to explain, but the air seemed to change, like when a thunderstorm is about to hit, but different. That's when I saw it. Near our storage shed, this small building about 6 feet tall where we kept garden tools, there was this thing. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light. But then it shifted its weight, and I could clearly see it was leaning casually against the shed, with its elbow resting on the roof. The shed was 6 feet tall. This thing was towering over it. It was massive, covered in this dark hair that looked black, but with grey mixed in, especially around what I guessed was its face. And that face, it wasn't like a gorilla or anything you'd see at a zoo. It was almost human-like, but bigger, rougher, with deep-set eyes that caught what little light there was. For a split second, we just stared at each other. It didn't seem aggressive, just curious, like it was studying me the same way I was frozen in place studying it. Then it straightened up to its full height, had to be 7 feet at least, and took a step toward me. I dropped that bucket so fast, water went everywhere as I spun around and bolted back to the house. I don't even remember opening the door. Just suddenly I was inside, slamming it behind me and running straight to the living room where Mom was folding laundry. I crashed into her lap, unable to get words out. I was hyperventilating, pointing toward the back door. Mom thought I was hurt at first, checking me over for injuries. "Jim, what's wrong? Did something happen? Are you hurt?" I remember shaking my head, trying to catch my breath enough to speak. Dad came in from the kitchen looking concerned. There's a... I kept stumbling over my words. "By the shed. Big, hairy thing." Dad immediately went serious. He grabbed his flashlight from the drawer and his shotgun from the cabinet. "Stay with your mother," he told me firmly before heading toward the back door. I heard him calling for Wolf as he went outside. Then there was this awful yelp, not a bark, but a sound of pure fear I'd never heard our dog make before. Seconds later, Wolf came tearing around the side of the house and straight to the back door, whimpering and trying to get inside. Dad said later that the creature must have struck him because Wolf had never run from anything before. Dad called our neighbors, the Johnsons and the Millers, who came over with their rifles. They spent hours searching the property and the edge of the woods, but found nothing except some weird impressions in the dirt near. The shed that weren't quite footprints, but definitely weren't from any animal we knew. That night, none of us slept well. Dad kept his shotgun by the bed, and Mom put all us kids in the upstairs bedrooms, all except my sisters, Emma and Sarah, who were 13 and 11. Their bedroom was downstairs, right next to the back door. Mom wanted them upstairs too, but they insisted they were fine. They had each other, and Emma thought the whole thing was just me being dramatic anyway. The next day was tense but normal. Dad and the neighbors did another search in daylight but found nothing. By evening we were all on edge but trying to act normal. Dad was working late in the garage fixing Mr. Johnson's tractor. Mum was upstairs putting my younger brothers to bed. I was in the living room pretending to read, but really just jumping at every sound. That's when I heard Emma scream. It wasn't a playful scream or a startled yelp. It was pure terror. Before I could even get up, both my sisters came tearing into the living room, faces white as sheets. Sarah was crying, and Emma, who never showed fear about anything, was shaking so hard she could barely speak. "It's at our window," she finally managed to get out. "The thing Jim saw. It's looking in our window." Mom came running down the stairs. "What's happening? Girls, what's wrong?" Emma grabbed Mum's arm. "There's something outside our window. It's huge, Mum. It filled the whole window, just staring in at us." Mum tried to calm them down, probably thinking they were feeding off my story from the night before. "Now, girls, you're just scaring yourselves." "No!" Sarah interrupted, still crying. "We saw it. It has a face like a person, but not, and it moved to the back door after it saw us." That last part made Mom freeze. She looked toward the kitchen where the back door was. We all heard it then, the sound of the screen door handle turning slowly, followed by a gentle pressure against the main door, like something testing if it was locked. Mum's face changed completely. She quietly told us all to go upstairs, right now. We didn't argue. As we reached the stairs, Mum grabbed the phone to call Dad in the garage, but then she looked toward the kitchen and dropped the phone. I turned back and saw her face. She was staring toward the kitchen, completely pale. From where I stood on the stairs, I could see part of the kitchen window, and there was a shadow there, much larger than any person should be. "Get upstairs now," Mom whispered urgently, backing up slowly before turning and pushing us up ahead of her. We huddled in my parents' bedroom while Mom called the sheriff's department on their landline. Dad had heard something banging around outside the garage and came running in through the front door minutes later, shotgun in hand. When Mum told him what happened, his face went hard in a way I'd never seen before. The sheriff's deputies took almost 45 minutes to arrive. By then, whatever had been outside was gone, or at least not visible anymore. The deputies searched around the house but refused to go beyond where the yard lights reached into the darkness. All they found was a strange patch of grass near our back steps where something had apparently vomited. It wasn't like animal sick. They said it smelled terrible and had weird bits in it they couldn't identify. One deputy, an older guy who'd lived in the area his whole life, pulled my dad aside. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I snuck close enough to listen. "Frank, I don't know what's out there, but whatever it is, it ain't natural," he said quietly. "There have been stories around these parts for generations, things in the woods that ain't quite animal, ain't quite human. My grandpa used to talk about them. Most folks think they're just tales, but..." He trailed off, looking toward the dark tree line. Dad asked if they could do anything, and the deputy just shook his head. "Keep your family inside after dark. Keep your gun loaded. It'll probably move on eventually. For weeks after, we lived in constant fear. Dad boarded up the windows on the first floor at night. None of us went outside alone, even during the day. We heard heavy footsteps around the house some nights. Twice we found strange prints in the mud that were almost like bare human feet, but much larger and shaped wrong. Sometimes we'd see movement at the edge of the tree line, just watching. But gradually, the incidents became less frequent. By Christmas, we hadn't seen or heard anything for over 2 weeks. Life slowly returned to normal, though none of us ever felt completely safe there again. We moved away the following summer. Dad said it was for a better job, but I know the real reason. Some things you just can't live with, no matter how much time passes between encounters. To this day, I've never told anyone outside my family what we saw. Who would believe it? A 7-foot-tall, hairy creature that looked almost human but wasn't. Something intelligent enough to check windows and try doorknobs. Something that could disappear without a trace despite its size. I'm 34 now, with kids of my own. We live in the suburbs, far from any woods. My wife thinks I'm overprotective because I won't let the kids play outside alone after dusk. I've never told her why. How could I explain that somewhere out there, something exists that science can't explain? Something that, for whatever reason, came to our farmhouse that night and looked in at us with eyes that seemed almost curious. The scariest part isn't what happened. It's that I know it's still out there somewhere. And sometimes, when I visit my parents and drive past our old property, I swear I can feel eyes watching from the tree line, remembering me just as clearly as I remember it. Story 3. I'm still struggling to talk about what happened to me and my family without feeling that cold tingle down my spine. I'm not someone who believes in monsters or fairy tales. I'm a practical person who likes facts and logic. But what happened at our home in Cascade has shaken everything I thought I knew about the world. It all started back in the summer of 2011 when my friend Sarah needed a place to crash for a couple weeks. Money was tight for her, and she asked if she could pitch a tent in our backyard. We have a decent-sized property that backs up to woodland, so I said sure, why not? At first everything was fine. Sarah would come in to use the bathroom, sometimes join us for dinner, then head back out to her little campsite. But after about 3 nights, she started mentioning weird noises around her tent. I didn't think much of it. We get deer, raccoons, even the occasional moose passing through. That's just part of living in Idaho. One night, though, things got intense. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was up late working on my laptop when a message from Sarah popped up on Facebook. "Lisa, are you awake? Something is outside my tent. I'm freaking out." I messaged back telling her to stay calm, but then she sent another message. "It's breathing. I can hear it sniffing around the tent. It's big, Lisa, really big. It's walking in circles around me." I'll admit, I thought she was being dramatic. Sarah had always been the jumpy type. But I grabbed my robe and slippers and headed outside anyway. It was a clear night, pretty bright with the moon. I called out her name as I approached the tent, and she unzipped it looking absolutely terrified. "It was just here," she whispered, her face pale. "I swear to God, Lisa, something huge was walking around the tent." I walked the entire perimeter of our yard with her, flashlight in hand, but found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing. I convinced her it was probably just a deer and that the tent fabric was amplifying the sounds. She didn't look convinced, but eventually went back to her tent. The next day, she mentioned it again, but I brushed it off. Sarah moved out a week later, and honestly, I forgot about the whole thing until the following summer. My daughters Madison and Emma, 15 and 13 at the time, took our dog Luna out for her evening bathroom break around 11 at night. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when they burst through the back door, both talking over each other, faces flushed with fear. Mom, there's something in the backyard," Madison was practically shouting. "By the big pine tree," Emma added, pointing frantically toward the window. "It was huge." I sighed, remembering Sarah's panicked messages from the previous summer. Girls, it's probably just a deer, or maybe an elk. They come down from the hills sometimes. Mom, it was standing up, Madison insisted. It was way taller than Dad. I peeked out the window but couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond our yard lights. The dog seemed completely unbothered, which reinforced my skepticism. I told them they were letting their imaginations run wild and sent them off to finish their homework. About an hour later, they came tearing back into the house again after taking Luna out one last time before bed. It's back, Emma was crying now. It was walking around the pool, then it went into the woods. Madison nodded vigorously. I swear on my life, Mom, it was massive, like a person, but not a person. I called my husband in, and he gave the girls the usual dad speech about how there was nothing to worry about, how wild animals are more afraid of us than we are of them. The girls eventually calmed down, but they refused to take Luna out after dark for weeks afterward. I chalked it up to Sarah's stories somehow filtering down to the girls, maybe something they'd overheard us discussing. My husband Mark and our son Caleb, who was 21 at the time, both laughed it off. Caleb even made jokes about the backyard monster for months. But then, November 27th, 2012, happened. It was unseasonably warm that night, almost 50 degrees despite being late fall. Around quarter to midnight, our new puppy Baxter, just 5 months old at the time, was whining to go out. Mark was already asleep, and I didn't want to wake him for what should have been a quick potty break. I clipped Baxter's leash on and stepped outside. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in this weird silvery light. Our property has a gradual slope down toward the woods, with about 60 feet of open yard before the tree line starts. I remember thinking how peaceful it all looked. The moonlight on the grass, the silhouettes of the trees. Baxter was taking his sweet time, sniffing around and getting distracted like puppies do. I walked with him toward the edge of our property, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the back door, letting him lead the way as he snuffled through the grass. That's when I heard it. A sound from the thick briars at the edge of the woods, not the normal rustling of small animals or wind. This was the sound of something big moving through the underbrush. My first thought was exactly what I'd told the girls, probably just a deer. I turned toward the sound, expecting to see the white tail of a deer bounding away. Instead, I saw it stand up. I can't adequately describe the terror of that moment. What had been a dark shape on all fours suddenly rose up and up and up. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. The width of its chest was what struck me most. It was so broad, like a bodybuilder, but wrong somehow. In the moonlight, I could make out that its chest or stomach area was lighter colored than the rest of its body, which was dark, almost black. I screamed. I'm not proud of it, but I screamed like I've never screamed before. Baxter, oddly, didn't react at all, didn't bark, didn't growl, nothing. It was like he couldn't see what I was seeing. I yanked his leash and ran back toward the house, practically dragging the poor puppy. Behind me, I burst through the back door, slamming it shut and locking it with shaking hands. Mark was already up, startled awake by my screams. Caleb came running down the stairs, asking what the hell was going on. "There's something out there," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "Something huge. It stood up. It was watching me." Mark looked skeptical, but Caleb's face changed. He wasn't laughing now. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and a knife from the block. Mark followed him, telling me to stay inside with the dog. I watched from the window as they moved cautiously into the yard, Mark shining the flashlight in wide arcs, while Caleb scanned the tree line. They were out there for maybe 5 minutes before Caleb suddenly pointed towards something near our tire swing. When they came back inside, Caleb's face was pale. "I saw it," he said quietly. "A big shadow moving behind the swing. When it saw us, it ran, fast, toward the hillside. It crashed through the briars like they were nothing." He shook his head. "The weird thing is, when it got near the spring, the sounds just stopped. like it was suddenly standing still, like it was watching us. Mark tried to rationalize it, maybe a bear, though we rarely get them in our area. But Caleb and I both knew what we'd seen. It was too tall, too broad, too deliberate in its movements to be a bear. It moved like a person, but no person is that size. We stayed up late that night, all of us, including the girls who'd woken up from the commotion. We compared notes. What Madison and Emma had seen matched what Caleb and I described. Extremely tall, impossibly broad, fast. Maybe it's just curious, Mark suggested, still trying to find some rational explanation. Whatever it is, it hasn't tried to hurt anyone. It just watches. But that was exactly what terrified me. It had been watching us for over a year. Sarah's experience suddenly made perfect sense. This thing had been circling her tent, sniffing, probably studying. Her. It had been observing my daughters by the pool, and now it had been watching me with my puppy. We installed security lights the next day, motion sensors all around the property. Mark even set up some trail cameras in the trees. But we never caught anything on film. The lights would occasionally trigger for no apparent reason, but the cameras showed nothing. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I was in the yard. I started taking the dogs out only during daylight hours. The girls refused to go outside alone after dark. Caleb, who had been the biggest skeptic, became obsessed with researching what we might have seen. He showed me reports of Bigfoot sightings in Idaho, pointing out similarities to what we'd experienced: the height, the broad chest, the apparent intelligence and curiosity, the way it seemed to vanish without a trace. I've never been one to believe in cryptids or monsters, but I know what I saw that night wasn't a bear, wasn't a moose, wasn't anything I can explain. It was intelligent. It was watching us. And sometimes, especially on clear moonlit nights like the one when I saw it, I still get the feeling it's out there in the woods, just beyond the reach of our security lights, watching our home. We've had a few odd incidents since then. Strange noises at night, the feeling of being followed when walking near the tree line, unusual breaks in the underbrush that don't match deer or elk patterns. But we've never had another clear sighting like the one I had that November night. I still live in the same house. I still love Cascade and our property, but that experience changed something fundamental about how I view the world. There are things out there we don't understand. Things that exist in the shadows, just beyond what we consider normal. Whatever it was, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or something else entirely, it was real. And sometimes when I let Baxter out at night, he's an old dog now, I find myself scanning the edge of the woods, half expecting to see that massive silhouette rise up from the darkness once again. Story 4. I still get chills thinking about what happened last New Year's Eve. I've tried to forget about it, tried to convince myself it was just a weird trick of the light or my imagination playing games with me. But my son saw it too, and that's what keeps me up at night sometimes. I live just outside Marshall, Texas. Been here most of my life. It's mostly quiet, the kind of place where not much happens. My ex-wife had my son, Tommy, for Christmas, and I was supposed to get him for New Year's. We had plans to go to this party at Lake of the Pines with some friends of mine. Tommy was 16 at the time, not really thrilled about hanging out with his old man and his buddies, but he was being a good sport about it. I picked him up around 7 that evening. It was already dark out, that deep kind of winter darkness that settles over everything. We were taking FM 1997 north to get to the lake. If you've never been on that road, it's your typical rural highway. 2 lanes, not much traffic, especially at night, and thick woods pressing in on both sides. The trees form this wall of darkness that your headlights barely penetrate. We were maybe 15 minutes into the drive, just chatting about school and how his Christmas had been. Tommy was scrolling through his phone, picking music. It was comfortable, normal. The radio was playing some classic rock, and I remember thinking how nice it was to have this time with him. That's when we saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe someone who had pulled over with car trouble. You know how your mind immediately tries to make sense of something that doesn't fit? But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't either of those things. About 8 feet from the edge of the road, there was this figure. I slowed down instinctively, not dramatically, just eased off the gas. The figure was kneeling on one knee, facing away from the road, toward the tree line. It was wearing what looked like a thick brown fur coat, or covering of some kind. The fur seemed matted in places, uneven. "Dad, what is that?" Tommy asked, finally looking up from his phone. His voice had this edge to it that made my skin crawl. He'd seen it too. "I don't know," I said, slowing down even more as we approached. "Maybe someone hunting, though it's a weird place to be." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. Nobody hunts that close to the road, especially not at night on New Year's Eve. And hunters wear orange, not whatever this was. As we drew alongside it, the headlights illuminated it better, and that's when the real unease set in. The figure didn't move at all. Not a twitch, not a turn of the head, nothing to acknowledge our car passing just a few yards away. It remained perfectly still, kneeling there like it was waiting for something, or listening. I couldn't see a face or head clearly, just that brown fur-covered back. The proportions seemed off somehow. The shoulders too broad or maybe too hunched. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly was wrong, but something definitely was. "Should we stop?" Tommy asked, but I could tell he didn't want to. His hand had moved to the door lock, pressing it down, though I knew the doors were already locked. For a split second, I considered turning around. That's what bothers me most looking back, that I actually considered going back for a closer look. Something primitive in my brain was curious, wanted to know what it was we were seeing. "No," I said finally, "we're already running late." It was a lie. We had plenty of time. But something in my gut told me to keep driving, to put distance between us and whatever that was. We drove in silence for maybe half a mile before Tommy spoke again. "What do you think that was?" His voice was quiet, like he was afraid of the answer. "Probably just someone messing around," I said, trying to sound casual. "Kids playing a prank or something. On New Year's Eve, in the middle of nowhere." He had a point, and the way it was positioned, not standing by the roadside trying to get attention or help, but kneeling, facing away, made no sense for a prank. "Maybe someone drunk or on something," I suggested. "Either way, not our problem." But I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing in the middle of the road behind us. There was nothing but darkness. We tried to shake it off as we continued to the party. When we arrived, I had a few beers, Tommy hung out with some other teenagers who were there, and we did the whole countdown thing at midnight, but neither of us was really present. I caught Tommy looking at me several times throughout the night, and I knew we were both thinking about what we'd seen. On the drive back, we took a different route. Neither of us suggested it directly, but I remembered some construction on FM 1997 that would be better to avoid. Tommy didn't question it. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing that kneeling figure in my mind, trying to make sense of it. By morning, I'd convinced myself that there had to be a logical explanation. The not knowing was worse than whatever the truth might be. "I think we should go back," I told Tommy over breakfast. He looked up from his cereal, surprised. "Really?" He didn't seem enthusiastic about the idea. "Yeah, in daylight. It was probably just something simple we couldn't make out properly in the dark. Maybe someone left a hunting dummy or a large bag of something." He nodded slowly. "Okay." So around 10 in the morning, we headed back to FM 1997. It was a clear, cold day, the kind where everything looked sharper somehow. We drove slowly, both of us scanning the roadside. "It was right around here," I said, as we approached the area where we'd seen the figure. Tommy agreed. We slowed to a crawl, looking carefully. There was nothing there, nothing at all. We pulled over and got out of the car. The spot where the figure had been kneeling was just empty forest floor. Pine needles, some dead leaves, ordinary woods. No signs that anything or anyone had been there. No footprints, no disturbed ground, no bits of costume or clothing. Maybe it was further up, Tommy suggested, but I could tell he knew this was the right spot, just as I did. We walked around a bit, even ventured a little way into the trees, but found absolutely nothing unusual. After about 20 minutes of searching, we gave up and got back in the car. "So, what was it?" Tommy asked as we drove away. "What did we see?" I didn't have an answer then, and I still don't now, almost a year later. I've thought about reporting it, but what would I say? That I saw something kneeling by the road wearing fur, that it didn't move, that it disappeared without a trace? Who would take that seriously? I've tried researching local legends, looking for anything similar. Marshall has its share of ghost stories and regional folklore, but nothing that matches what we saw. I've even driven back alone a few times at different hours, hoping to see it again, though what I'd do if I actually did, I have no idea. Tommy and I don't talk about it much anymore. It's like there's an unspoken agreement between us that bringing it up only makes it more real, more unsettling. But sometimes I'll catch him looking off into the distance with this thoughtful expression, and I know he's thinking about it. The thing that bothers me most isn't just what we saw. It's the feeling that came with it. That deep sense of wrongness, like we'd glimpsed something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something that existed just outside the edges of our ordinary world. I still take FM 1997 sometimes, usually during daylight hours. My heart always beats a little faster as I approach that stretch of road. Part of me is afraid I'll see that figure, again, kneeling there, waiting. And part of me is afraid I won't, that whatever it was is gone forever, leaving me with questions I'll never answer. All I know for certain is that whatever we saw that New Year's Eve wasn't normal. It wasn't someone in costume, wasn't a hunter, wasn't anything that makes logical sense. And in the quiet moments, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I find myself wondering, if it wasn't facing the road, if it was kneeling toward the forest, what was it looking at? Or worse, what was it waiting for? Sometimes I think about how close we came to stopping, to getting out of the car to investigate. And that's when the real fear hits me. Not just of what we saw, but of what might have happened if we'd tried to get closer. I don't have any profound conclusions or explanations. All I have is what I saw, what we both saw. A figure kneeling by the roadside on New Year's Eve, covered in brown fur, completely motionless. And then, in the light of day, nothing at all. That's my story. I don't expect anyone to believe it. Hell, sometimes I'm not sure I believe it myself. But it happened. And I haven't been able to shake the feeling that somehow, in some way I can't explain, crossing paths with that thing changed something. Like seeing it opened a door that wasn't supposed to be opened. And sometimes, late at night, I can't help but wonder if that door is still open and what might eventually come through. Story 5. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family and a couple of close friends. Even now, more than 50 years later, I still get this tight feeling in my chest when I think about it. I grew up in Lincolnville, this tiny speck of a community outside Summerville, South Carolina. Back in 1970, I was 11 years old, and our family home sat on about an acre and a half of land, completely surrounded by dense woods. It started in early summer. Me and the neighborhood kids would spend our evenings playing hide and seek after the sun went down. The property was perfect for it. Big enough to have good hiding spots, but small enough that our parents felt comfortable letting us run around until we got called in. There were 5 or 6 of us most nights, all around the same age. This one evening in June, I remember it was sticky hot, the kind of southern humidity that makes your clothes cling to you even after the sun goes down. I was hiding behind my dad's tool shed, crouched down in the tall grass. I was feeling pretty clever about my spot when this smell hit me. Not gradually, but all at once, like walking into a wall. It was the most awful stench I've ever encountered in my life, like rotting meat and wet dog fur, combined with something else I can't even describe. It was so bad it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. At first, I thought maybe something had died nearby. We had woods all around us, so finding a dead possum or raccoon wouldn't have been unusual. But this was different. This smell had a presence to it, if that makes any sense, like it was alive and moving. I stood up from my hiding spot, completely forgetting about the game, and looked toward the tree line. That's when I saw them. Two red eyes glowing from within the darkness of the woods. Not reflecting light like an animal's eyes do with a flashlight. These were glowing on their own, like two burning embers. They were positioned higher up than made sense, higher than any deer or even a person would be. The thing that struck me most was how still it was. Whatever it was just watching us. Watching me. I couldn't make out a shape or body, just those eyes in the darkness and that horrible smell. I yelled for my friends. Tommy was the first one to come running, followed by Darla and Mike. They all smelled it too and saw the eyes. We stood there frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then Mike broke the spell by screaming, and we all bolted for my house. My grandmother and older cousin were inside watching TV when we burst through the door, all talking at once about what we'd seen. Of course, they didn't believe us. My cousin Reggie laughed and said we were just scaring ourselves, and my grandmother told us to settle down and stop with the wild imagination. But she did notice how genuinely frightened we were and didn't make us go back outside. Over the next few weeks, it showed up more frequently, always after dark, always preceded by that unmistakable stench. Sometimes we'd just see the eyes. Other times, we'd catch glimpses of a large shadow moving between the trees at the edge of our property. None of us wanted to admit how scared we were, so we kept playing outside, but we started staying closer to the house and keeping the back porch light on. Around this same time, something else started happening in our neighborhood. Dogs began turning up dead, not just dead, but wrong. Their bodies would be found with crushed skulls or twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Old Man Wilson's German Shepherd, a big, strong dog that no regular predator would mess with, was found with its head completely caved in. Mrs. Parker's two beagles disappeared entirely. Everyone blamed it on coyotes or maybe a bear, though bears weren't common in our area. The worst night happened in late July. My best friend Tommy and I had this brilliant idea to camp out in an abandoned mobile home that sat near the edge of our property. It had been there for years, left behind by previous owners. We'd taken flashlights, sleeping bags, and enough snacks to last us through the night. We felt brave, like we were proving something to ourselves. We must have fallen asleep around 11, the summer crickets and frogs making their usual racket outside. I woke up suddenly around 1 in the morning. The night had gone completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Tommy was still asleep beside me. Then I heard it. Footsteps circling the trailer. Heavy footsteps that made the ground vibrate slightly. I shook Tommy awake and put my hand over his mouth before he could speak. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, making a complete circuit around the trailer. Then came the breathing. Deep, wet, raspy breathing right outside the window nearest to us. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. It wasn't like any animal or person I'd ever heard. Tommy was trembling beside me. The smell seeped in through the cracks around the windows, that same rotting, musky odor. We huddled in our sleeping bags, too terrified to move. Then it started pounding on the sides of the trailer. Not like knocking, but like something was testing the structure, seeing if it could get in. Each impact made the whole trailer shake. We had a small window in the trailer, and through it I could see a huge shadow pass by. It was hunched over, but still impossibly tall. Its arms looked wrong, too long, almost reaching the ground. The silhouette was shaggy, not smooth like a person. It circled that trailer for hours, occasionally hitting the sides or scraping against the metal. Just before dawn, it finally left. The silence was replaced by the normal sounds of early morning, and the smell gradually faded. Tommy and I waited until full daylight before we grabbed our stuff and ran back to my house. We never talked about camping out again. A few weeks later, my whole family was woken up around 2 in the morning by a tremendous bang against the side of our house. It sounded like someone had thrown a bowling ball at the wall. My little brother started screaming from his bedroom. My dad grabbed his shotgun and my mom turned on all the outside lights. My brother was hysterical. Between sobs, he said he'd seen a face looking in his window, a face that wasn't human. His room was on the 2nd floor. Dad, my older brother, and I went outside with flashlights. My dad had his shotgun ready. We didn't see anything, but we heard it. Heavy footsteps retreating across our yard, and then a sound like something effortlessly stepping over our 4-foot fence. The smell lingered in the air. Word spread through our small community. Parents started keeping their kids inside after dark. Even the older teenagers weren't hanging out in the usual spots anymore. Something had changed in Lincolnville, and everyone felt it, even if most adults wouldn't acknowledge what was happening. The final time I saw it clearly was in early October. The days were getting shorter, and I'd been sent to turn off the light in our pump house as dusk was falling. It wasn't fully dark yet, just that blue-gray transition time. I flipped the switch and was heading back to the house when that smell hit me again. I froze in place, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I turned toward the woods and saw it standing there, just on the other side of our fence. In the fading light, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, standing upright on 2 legs. Its body was covered in dark brown hair, matted in places. Its arms hung down abnormally long, with huge hands that nearly reached its knees. It had a barrel-shaped chest and a head that seemed to sit directly on its shoulders without much of a neck. Its face had a sloping forehead and heavy brow, but the eyes were what held me, deep-set red eyes that seemed to glow from within. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It made no sound, no movement toward me. It just watched. Then, as I finally managed to take a step backward toward the house, it simply turned and was gone, moving through the trees with shocking speed for something so large. That was the last time I saw it clearly, though the smell would occasionally return over the next year, and sometimes at night we'd hear heavy footsteps in the yard. My family moved away from Lincolnville in 1972, and I've never been back. I'm 54 years old now, and I've spent decades trying to make sense of what happened during that summer and fall. I've read about Bigfoot sightings and other cryptids, but nothing quite matches what we experienced. Whatever was in those woods behind our house wasn't just an animal, but it wasn't human either. The thing that haunts me most isn't just the appearance of the creature, but the intelligence I sensed behind those eyes. It was watching us, studying us, maybe even stalking us. It seemed to understand exactly how to terrify us without ever actually attacking. It killed dogs, but left people alone. It could have gotten into that trailer with Tommy and me if it wanted to. The walls were thin aluminum, but it didn't. It just wanted us to know it was there. To this day, I can't explain what happened in Lincolnville. All I know is that something was there in those woods. Something that shouldn't exist according to science. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep at night, I still catch myself listening for heavy footsteps and that deep, wet breathing outside my window. Story 6. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last year. I've been sitting on this experience for months, trying to make sense of it, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. I need to tell someone who might understand, or at least not think I'm completely insane. It was June 20th, 2019. The date is burned into my memory because it changed how I see the world. I was driving down Route 563 just south of Chatsworth near the Franklin Parker Preserve in Earlington County, New Jersey. It was about 6:40 in the evening, still plenty of daylight left in the summer sky. I'm an avid hiker, and I was scoping out potential parking spots for a trail I wanted to check out that weekend. The road there is pretty quiet, typical Jersey. Pine barren scenery with scrubby pines, sandy soil, and swampy areas dotting the landscape. I had my windows down, enjoying the warm air and the smell of pine. My music was playing low, some Eagles album, I think, and I was driving slowly, maybe 30 miles per hour, scanning the roadside for those little gravel pullouts where you can park your car when hiking. That's when I spotted what I initially thought was just an unusually large groundhog at the edge of the road. Nothing extraordinary, right? We get plenty of wildlife in that area, deer, foxes, all kinds of critters. I remember thinking it was oddly big for a groundhog, but I didn't pay it much attention at first. As I drove past, something happened that sent an electric jolt through my entire body. The groundhog stood up on two legs. Not in that way groundhogs sometimes do when they're alert and looking around. This thing fully stood upright like a person. I caught it in my side mirror as I passed, and I nearly drove off the road from shock. It was small. I'd estimate around 3 to 3.5 feet tall, but unmistakably bipedal. My heart started racing, and I immediately slowed down, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it a kid in a costume, a prank, some kind of escaped exotic pet? None of those explanations felt right in that moment. I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions. I'm 42, I work in insurance. I have a mortgage and a golden retriever named Buddy. I'm as average and rational as they come. But what I saw wasn't normal, and I couldn't just drive away without checking it out. About 150 yards ahead, there was a dirt road cutting into the woods. I pulled in, turned around, and headed back to where I'd seen the creature. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me hoped I wouldn't see anything, that my eyes had just played tricks on me in the fading evening light. As I navigated the bend in the road, I slowed to a crawl. And there it was, about 30 yards ahead, standing in the middle of the road, fully facing me now. I hit the brakes and just stared, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. It wasn't a groundhog, it wasn't a child, it wasn't anything I had a name for. The creature looked like some bizarre hybrid between Curious George and that character Chaka from the old Land of the Lost TV show, if you remember that. Its face, hands and feet were completely hairless with light tan skin, almost like human skin but not quite. The rest of its body was covered in golden brown fur, darker than my golden retriever's coat, but similar in color to a groundhog. The fur looked short and dense. The face is what haunts me most. It had these enormous dark brown eyes, no whites visible, just these deep, intelligent-looking eyes that seemed to bore right through me. I couldn't make out much of a nose, just slight nostrils. Its mouth was small and seemed almost human-like, but not quite. When our eyes met, there was this moment of connection. I know how that sounds, but it's true. This wasn't an animal looking at me with fear or aggression. There was recognition there, awareness. It knew exactly what I was, and I had no idea what it was. That realization sent chills down my spine. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. My car idling, me gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, and this impossible creature standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. Then, in a flash, it darted sideways into the swampy area beside the road. The way it moved was astonishing. Not like a child, not like an animal. It was incredibly fast and agile, like watching the fastest kid on a 10 to 12-year-old baseball team, but with an unnatural fluidity. It ducked behind a short bush in the field, and I lost sight of it. I sat there for a moment, completely stunned. Then I put the car in drive and turned around again, pulling to the side of the road near where it had disappeared. I rolled down all my windows and cut the engine, hoping to hear movement in the underbrush or catch another glimpse. The evening was eerily quiet, just the occasional bird call and the distant hum of insects. I kept scanning the field, looking for any movement, any sign of the creature. Nothing. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. After about 15 minutes of waiting, my heart still pounding, I decided to leave. The sun was getting lower, and honestly, I was getting spooked. As I drove home, my mind raced with explanations. Was it an escaped monkey from somewhere? But those eyes weren't monkey eyes. Was it a child with some kind of condition? But no child moves like that, or has fur on their body. That night, a severe thunderstorm hit the area. I remember lying in bed, listening to the rain hammer against my roof, thinking about the creature, and realizing something odd. Its fur had looked completely dry. If it lived in that swampy area, you'd think it would have been damp or muddy, but it wasn't. It looked almost pristine. For days afterward, I obsessively checked local news, expecting to hear about a missing child, an escaped animal, something, anything that would explain what I'd seen. There was nothing. I even drove back to the spot twice in the following week, but saw no sign of the creature or any evidence it had been there. I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes, the intelligence in them, the way it had frozen when it realized I was looking at it, then made a deliberate choice to flee. This wasn't mindless animal behavior. There was calculation there. After about 2 weeks of this eating away at me, I worked up the courage to contact a group called BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. I'd never given Bigfoot much thought before this, honestly. It seemed like nonsense to me. But what I saw wasn't normal, and I didn't know where else to turn. I expected them to laugh me off, but they took my report seriously. 3 researchers, Eric, Art, and a woman named Heather, arranged to meet me at the location. I felt ridiculous leading them there, half convinced they'd think I was crazy or pulling a prank. We walked the area thoroughly. They asked detailed questions, much more specific than I expected. They wanted to know exact height, proportions, movement patterns, everything. As we talked through it, they helped me realize the creature was probably closer to 4 feet tall, not 3, as I'd initially estimated. Its shoulders were about 18 inches wide. They pointed out features I hadn't fully processed in the moment. How its arms were thin, but its legs seemed stockier and more muscular. How its chest appeared undeveloped compared to an adult human's. The auburn hair was probably 3 to 4 inches long, not as short as I'd thought in my shock. What floored me was when they told me there had been similar sightings in this exact area before. They believed what I'd encountered was a juvenile Sasquatch, a young Bigfoot. I almost laughed when they said it. Bigfoot? Really? But the more they explained, the more the pieces fit. The bipedal stance, the mixture of human and ape-like features, the intelligence in those eyes, the incredible speed and agility. They showed me reports from others who'd seen similar creatures in the Pine Barrens over the years. It's been over a year now, and I still don't know what to believe. I know what I saw wasn't a known animal, wasn't a person, and wasn't my imagination. Those eyes still haunt me. That moment of mutual recognition, of 2 intelligent species suddenly aware of each other's existence, was profound in a way I can't fully articulate. I've gone back to that spot many times since then. I've never seen the creature again. Sometimes I sit in my car at dusk, windows down, just listening and watching. Part of me hopes I'll see it again. Part of me is terrified I will. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm still not entirely sure what to believe myself. But I know what I saw that evening on Route 563. Something that shouldn't exist, according to what we're taught about the world. Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about what lives in the forests around us. What keeps me up at night isn't fear of the creature. It showed no aggression toward me. What haunts me is the implication. If this exists, what else might be out there that we don't acknowledge? What other intelligent eyes might be watching us from the woods, the swamps, the mountains? And why do they hide from us? I don't have answers, just questions and the memory of those eyes meeting mine on a summer evening in the Pine Barrens. Eyes that knew exactly what I was, while I'm still trying to understand what they belonged to. Story 7. I've never told anyone outside my family about what happened that summer day in 1968. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake a little. I'm 67 years old, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I guess enough time has passed that I can finally share it. Our family lived way up in northern Maine, about 20 miles from the nearest town. My dad worked for the Forestry Service, and we had this small house right at the edge of thousands of acres of wilderness. No neighbors for miles. Just us, my parents, my 3 older brothers, and me. I was 12 that summer. We were pretty self-sufficient out there. Mom had a big vegetable garden, we kept chickens, and we all knew how to hunt and fish. Late July meant blueberry season, and it was my job to pick them. I didn't mind. I actually loved it. There was this perfect patch just at the edge of the woods, maybe a quarter mile from our house. That morning started like any other. It was warm but not hot, probably around 70 degrees. The sky was clear and there was just a light breeze. I remember grabbing my wooden pail from the hook by the back door. Mom reminded me to be back by lunch, and I headed out, following the worn dirt path toward the berry patch. I'd been picking for maybe an hour, moving slowly through the bushes, my fingers stained purple. The pail was getting pretty heavy. I was daydreaming, probably thinking about the pie Mom would make, when something just changed. It's hard to explain, but the forest got quieter. The birds stopped singing. Even the insects seemed to go silent. That's when I felt it. This weird sensation crawling up my spine. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? It was like that, but stronger. I straightened up slowly, thinking maybe it was Jimmy or Mark, my brothers, trying to scare me. I scanned the edge of the trees and spotted what I thought was Jimmy crouched down behind some bushes about 30 feet away. But something felt off right away. The shape was all wrong. Too big, too low to the ground, but somehow bulky. "Jimmy?" I called out. "Mark? That's not funny." No answer. The shape didn't move. I took a step forward, squinting. "Hello?" That's when it shifted. Instead of standing up like a person would, it sank lower, pressing itself against the ground. I froze, suddenly realizing this was definitely not one of my brothers. My first thought was bear. We had black bears in the area, and Dad had taught us what to do if we encountered one. Don't run. Make yourself look big. Back away slowly. But before I could do anything, there was this explosive sound of branches breaking and undergrowth being crushed. Whatever it was, it moved with incredible speed and power through the brush, away from me. I caught just a glimpse of something dark disappearing into the denser woods. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I immediately turned toward home, clutching my blueberry pail against my chest. I didn't run. I was trying to stay calm, trying to convince myself it was just a bear, nothing to panic about. I'd made it maybe 50 feet down the path when something made me look back over my shoulder. That's when I saw it again, but this time it was standing upright next to a large pine tree, partially hidden but clearly visible enough for me to see it wasn't a bear. It was tall, taller than my dad, who was 6 feet. But what struck me most was the way it stood. It was definitely standing on 2 legs, but there was something wrong about its posture, something not quite human. Its shoulders were massive, way too broad, and its arms hung down much lower than a person's would, and it was covered in dark hair or fur, not like clothes, but like it was part of its body. I couldn't see its face clearly, thank God, but I had the distinct impression it was watching me intently. My blood turned to ice. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then I made a small movement, adjusting my grip on the pail, and it instantly ducked behind the tree. Not in a playful way, but in this eerily deliberate motion that made it clear it knew I had spotted it, and it didn't want to be seen. That's when real fear hit me. I started walking faster, not quite running, but moving as quickly as I could without spilling my berries. I know that sounds ridiculous now. Why was I worried about berries? But I think my brain was trying to cling to something normal, something that made sense. The path curved a bit before straightening out toward our house, and when I rounded that curve, I glanced back again. My stomach dropped. It was following me. It was on the path now, moving in this strange, loping gait that covered ground alarmingly fast, while still staying at least 100 feet behind me. When it realized I'd spotted it again, it immediately ducked behind another tree, but it was too big or too clumsy, because it crashed into some low branches. The sound was deafening in the quiet forest, like someone had thrown a dresser down the stairs. Branches snapped, and there was this deep, huffing sound that definitely wasn't a bear or anything I'd ever heard before. That's when I lost it. I dropped the pail, spilling blueberries everywhere, and ran screaming toward the house. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning, and I could hear blood rushing in my ears. The entire time, I was convinced it was right behind me, about to grab me with those long arms. I burst into the yard, still screaming. My oldest brother, Jimmy, was splitting wood by the shed, and Mark was fixing his bike on the porch. They both jumped up, Jimmy grabbing his axe and running toward me. "Lizzie, what's wrong? What happened?" Jimmy grabbed my shoulders while Mark ran inside. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. Something, in the woods, following me. I managed between sobs. Mark came back out with Dad's rifle, and Jimmy took it from him. Mom came running from the garden, and I collapsed into her arms, trembling all over. It was huge, standing by the tree, watching me. Jimmy and Mark exchanged this look I'll never forget. It wasn't disbelief, it was recognition. Then Jimmy handed me off to Mom and said, "Take her inside, lock the doors, we're going to check it out." "Be careful," Mom said, and there was real fear in her voice. She hustled me inside while my brothers grabbed another rifle from the gun cabinet and headed down the path. Dad was working a 24-hour shift at the fire tower, so he wasn't home. Mom sat me at the kitchen table and gave me a glass of water, but her hands were shaking too. She kept glancing out the window toward the path where my brothers had disappeared. "What did you see exactly?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. I told her everything, the shape in the bushes, how it stood up by the tree, the dark hair, the long arms, the way it followed me. While I was talking, I noticed she wasn't looking surprised or skeptical. She was nodding slightly, like she was confirming something she already knew. "Mom," I asked, "do you know what it was?" She patted my hand. "Probably just a bear, honey. You know they can stand on their hind legs." But I knew bears. This wasn't a bear. And I could tell she didn't believe it was either. My brothers were gone for almost an hour. When they finally came back, they were sweaty and serious looking. Jimmy was carrying my empty blueberry pail. "Found this," he said, setting it on the table. "Berries everywhere." "Did you see anything?" Mom asked in that same careful voice. Mark shook his head, but Jimmy hesitated before saying, "We found where something had been lying in the brush watching the berry patch. The plants were all matted down in a big area." "Was it a bear?" I asked, hoping somehow they'd confirm that's all it had been. Another one of those looks between them. "Don't think so," Jimmy finally said. "No bear tracks. But whatever it was, it's gone now." "There was a smell," Mark added, then seemed to regret saying it when Jimmy shot him a warning look. "What kind of smell?" I pressed. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I don't know, like wet fur, but worse, kind of rotting." "That's enough," Mom said sharply. "No need to scare her more." The strangest part came next. Dad got home the following morning, and Mom and my brothers told him what happened. They all went into the living room and closed the door, talking in low voices I couldn't quite make out. When they came out, Dad just ruffled my hair and said, "No more berry picking alone. One of the boys will go with you from now on." And that was it. No one ever mentioned it again, not once. When I tried to bring it up a few days later, Dad changed the subject and Mom told me to leave it be. I didn't go near that berry patch for the rest of the summer. Actually, I didn't go back to it ever again. The next year, we picked berries from a different spot on the other side of our property. For years, I convinced myself maybe it was just a bear, that my imagination had run wild. But sometimes I'd catch my brothers, scanning the tree line when we were outside, or notice how Dad always seemed to make sure we were all inside before dark. A few years later, when I was 16, I overheard Jimmy and Dad talking on the porch late at night. Jimmy said something about that thing being spotted again by the Millers over on Cove Road, about 10 miles from us. Dad just said, "They know to keep quiet about it, right?" To this day, I don't know if my brothers found something in the woods they didn't want to tell me, or if they'd seen something similar before. All I know is that whatever was watching me in the berry patch that day wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, and the memory of those long arms and that hulking shape still gives me nightmares. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, but what I saw didn't match the descriptions exactly. It moved differently, more predatory, more aware. And there was something about the way it followed me, the way it hid when I spotted it, that seemed almost intelligent, like it was studying me. Whatever it was, I'm certain of one thing. It didn't want to be seen, but it wanted to see me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet, I still get that feeling crawling up my spine, like something's watching from just beyond the trees. Story 8. I still can't believe what I saw last week. I've been working at Wheeler's Hardware on the north end of Desert Hot Springs for almost 6 years now, just a small shop that serves the scattered homes and ranches in the high desert outside Palm Springs. Nothing exciting ever happens here, just the normal flow of contractors, weekend warriors fixing up their homes, and the occasional lost tourist looking for Joshua Tree. That night was supposed to be like any other closing shift. It was a Thursday, around 10 o'clock. I remember checking my watch as I was doing final inventory because my girlfriend had texted asking when I'd be home. The days had been getting hotter, but the night still had that desert chill that makes you grab a light jacket. I was tired, looking forward to getting home, maybe having a beer, and watching whatever game was on that night. I did my usual closing routine. Counted the register, swept the floors, made sure everything was locked up tight. Nothing out of the ordinary. The shop sits about half a mile off the main highway, with just a gravel driveway connecting us to civilization. There's not much around, some Joshua trees, scrubby desert vegetation, and rocky hills in the distance. At night, it gets pitch black out there without any streetlights. When I finally locked the front door, I remember feeling that familiar sensation of being completely alone in the vastness of the desert. The silence is different out here. It's heavy, like you can actually feel it pressing against your ears. The only sounds were the gentle crunching of gravel under my boots and the jingling of my keys as I walked to my car. My old VW Bug isn't much to look at, but it's reliable and gets decent gas mileage for my commute. I got in, tossed my lunch bag on the passenger seat, and started her up. The headlights came on automatically, cutting 2 weak yellow beams through the darkness. That's when everything changed. About 40 feet ahead, directly in my path down the driveway, stood something that shouldn't exist. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a large bush I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps someone had dumped a refrigerator on our property. But then I realized it was standing on 2 legs. I froze with my hands on the steering wheel. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still in the dim glow of my headlights. My car sits low to the ground, so the headlights were angled upward, illuminating just the lower portion of whatever was standing there. What I could see clearly was enough to make my blood run cold. The creature, and there's no other word for it, was covered in light tan hair or fur that moved slightly in the breeze. Not like someone wearing a costume, but like actual hair growing from skin. The legs were massive, easily twice the thickness of a human's, and the stance was wider than any person would naturally stand. I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling on the wheel. Some primal part of my brain was screaming at me to reverse, to get away, but curiosity overrode my fear for just a moment. I reached down and flicked on my high beams. That's when it moved. In the enhanced light, I could see more of the figure, and what I saw will haunt me forever. Its chest was enormous, as wide as a refrigerator, no exaggeration. The arms hung down unnaturally long, well past where a human's would end, reaching below the waist. The proportions were all wrong. No human could be built like that, not even the most dedicated bodybuilder on the planet. This thing was massive, probably 7 or 8 feet tall, though it was hard to judge accurately in the darkness. When the brighter lights hit it, the creature took 2 enormous steps backward. Not small shuffling steps, but huge strides that covered more ground than a person could manage, and then 1 step sideways. And then it was gone. Just gone. No sound, no crashing through brush, no footfalls. It simply vanished into the darkness beyond my headlights. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my temples. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified. I have a concealed carry permit and keep a .45 in my glove compartment for emergencies. But even with that knowledge, I felt completely vulnerable. Something about this creature made all my instincts scream, predator. Not like a coyote or even a mountain lion. This was something else entirely. I put the car in reverse, backed up to the shop, and then peeled out down the driveway as fast as my little bug could manage on the gravel. I didn't even finish my closing duties, didn't set the alarm system or check the back door. I just needed to get away. The whole 15-minute drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Could it have been someone in a costume? But the movements were too fluid, too natural. A bear standing on its hind legs? No way. The proportions were all wrong, and bears don't just disappear silently into the night. Besides, we don't get many bears in this part of the desert. When I got home, my girlfriend could tell something was wrong. I was pale and shaking. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words sounded ridiculous coming out of my mouth. She thought I was playing a joke on her at first, then suggested maybe I was more tired than I realized and had seen a large bush or rock formation in the weird shadows of my headlights. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, questioning my sanity, wondering if I should tell anyone else or just keep my mouth shut so people wouldn't think I was crazy. The next day, I had to go back to the shop. I seriously considered calling in sick, but I knew my boss would have to drive all the way out there to open up if I didn't show. I arrived in broad daylight, heart racing as I pulled into the same driveway. Everything looked normal. I even walked out to where I thought the creature had been standing and looked for footprints or any sign of disturbance. There was nothing, just hard-packed desert soil that wouldn't show tracks easily. For a few days, I didn't tell anyone else. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of light and shadow. But I couldn't shake the image of that thing standing there, couldn't forget the primal fear I'd felt. About a week later, an older local guy named Frank came in looking for some PVC fittings for his well pump. Frank's been in the area for decades, knows everyone and everything. As I was helping him find the right parts, I casually mentioned that I'd seen something strange on the property the other night. "What kind of strange?" he asked, suddenly interested. I hesitated, then described what I'd seen as matter-of-factly as I could, trying not to sound like a lunatic. As I spoke, Frank's expression changed from curiosity to something more serious. "You saw the yucca man," he said quietly, glancing around even though we were alone in the store. "The what?" I asked. "Yucca man. That's what the old-timers call it. Been stories about it around here since before I was born." I felt a chill run down my spine. You're telling me other people have seen this thing? Frank nodded slowly. Not many talk about it openly. You mention it in town, most folks will laugh at you or change the subject. But out here in the desert, especially the old ranchers and the folks who've been here a long time, they know. He went on to tell me that sightings went back decades, a desert Bigfoot of sorts that appeared and disappeared without warning. Most encounters were brief, just like mine. The Marines at the combat center in 29 Palms supposedly had incidents with it too, though nothing official, of course. Why is it called the Yucca Man? I asked. Some say it hides among the yucca plants. Others think it smells like yucca flowers. Honestly, I don't know. That's just what my grandfather called it. Frank must have seen the look on my face because he added, "Listen, son, I'm not saying I believe all the stories, but I've lived out here long enough to know there are things in this desert that don't make sense. Things that science can't explain. You saw something and you're not crazy." After Frank left, I spent hours online researching Yucca Man and desert Bigfoot sightings. There weren't many credible sources, mostly just forum posts and obscure websites, but the descriptions matched what I'd seen. The height, the tan coloration, the silent movement, the unusually proportioned body. It's been a week now, and I'm still struggling with what happened. I've started carrying my gun with me when I close up shop, and I've installed better lights in the parking area. I don't stay late anymore if I can help it. The thing that gets me most is how silent it was. Something that big should make noise when it moves. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no rustling of brush. Just those two enormous steps backward and one to the side, and it was gone. I find myself constantly scanning the desert whenever I'm driving now, especially at dusk. My girlfriend thinks I'm being paranoid, and maybe I am. But I know what I saw. That wasn't a person in a costume. It wasn't a bear or a trick of the light. I keep wondering what would have happened if I'd gotten out of my car that night. What if I'd tried to follow it? The thought makes my skin crawl. Whatever that thing was, it was powerful. I could sense it even from inside my car, a presence that radiated strength and wildness. So that's my story. I don't expect everyone to believe me, but I know what I saw. The locals have a name for it, which means I'm not the first and probably won't be the last to encounter it. The Yucca Man is out there in the high desert, and now I understand why most people around here don't like talking about it. Some things are just too strange, too unsettling to fit into our normal view of the world. If you're ever driving through the high desert north of Palm Springs late at night, keep your eyes open. And if you see something tall standing in the darkness, something that doesn't move quite right, don't stop, don't get out of your car. Just drive away as fast as you can. I got lucky. You might not. Story 9. I never told many people about what happened to me last summer while working as a ranger at Jasper National Park. I'm still trying to make sense of it myself, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back there again. I've been a ranger at Jasper for about 3 years now. I love the wilderness, the mountains, the crisp air. It's why I took the job in the first place. The park spans over 11,000 square kilometers, and even after 3 years, there are still areas I haven't fully explored. That's what made me decide to check out the Gap during my day off last July. For those who don't know, the Gap isn't on any official park maps. It's this natural break in the riverside wall that lets you access a really secluded section of the park. Most tourists stick to the marked trails or take the Sky Tram, and even other rangers rarely venture through the Gap because it's a bit tricky to navigate and doesn't lead to any designated attractions. I set out early that morning, around 6. The air was cool, probably about 45 degrees, and there was this thin layer of mist hanging over everything. I packed light, just water, some trail mix, my Ranger first aid kit, bear spray, standard protocol in Jasper, and my camera. I wasn't planning on being out for more than 8 hours. The hike to the Gap took about an hour and a half. I remember checking my watch when I finally reached it, 7:42 a.m. The gap itself is pretty unassuming. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past it. It's basically a narrow crevice between two rock faces that opens up into a dried riverbed. During spring runoff, it's completely impassable, but by July, it's dry enough to walk through. As soon as I squeezed through the gap, the temperature dropped noticeably. The sun wasn't hitting this section yet, and the walls of rock on either side were probably 50 feet high. I had to use my hands to steady myself as I picked my way down the rocky slope. The sound of the river rushing somewhere below echoed off the walls. Once I made it through, I found myself in a completely different landscape than what most park visitors ever see. I was below the Maine bridge that crosses the river, in this sort of alpine basin surrounded by mountains on three sides. The ground was a mix of loose rock, patches of moss, and hardy mountain plants. There were no marked trails here, just wilderness. I took a few minutes to catch my breath and get my bearings. The isolation hit me all at once. I couldn't hear anything except the distant river and the occasional bird. No people, no vehicles, nothing. It was both exhilarating and a little unnerving. I decided to follow what looked like a game trail leading around the basin's edge. About 40 minutes into my hike through this area, I noticed something strange in a muddy patch near a small stream. At first, I thought it was just an unusual erosion pattern, but as I got closer, I realized it was a footprint. And not just any footprint. This thing was massive. I've seen plenty of animal tracks in my time as a ranger. We have grizzlies, black bears, moose, elk, all sorts of large mammals. But this didn't match anything I was familiar with. The print was easily 18 inches long, maybe even 20. It had 5 distinct toe impressions and a wide arch, almost like a human foot, but much, much larger. My first thought was that it must be a bear print that had somehow been distorted by rain or melting snow. But there were no claw marks, which you'd definitely see with a bear. And the shape was all wrong, too elongated, too foot-like. I knelt down to examine it more closely. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was heavy. The edges were relatively crisp, so it couldn't have been more than a day old. I pulled out my phone and took several photos, placing my own boot next to it for scale. My size 8 hiking boot looked tiny in comparison. I'd like to say I turned around then and there, but curiosity got the better of me. I kept going, scanning the ground for more prints. The terrain was mostly rocky, so tracks were hard to find. But about 30 minutes later, I spotted another partial print in a small patch of mud. Same unusual width, same 5 toe impressions. My heart was beating faster now. I'm trained to identify all local wildlife, and this matched nothing in our database. I'd heard stories from some of the older rangers about strange things in the backcountry, but I'd always written them off as campfire tales meant to scare newbies. I decided to climb higher up the slope to get a better view of the area. The incline was steep, and the loose rock made it treacherous. Several times, I had to grab onto scrubby bushes to keep from sliding backward. By the time I reached a small plateau about 200 feet up, I was breathing hard and sweating despite the cool air. From this vantage point, I could see most of the basin. The river curved around the western edge, and the gap was visible as a thin slice in the otherwise solid rock wall. The sun had risen higher now, illuminating most of the basin except for the shadows cast by the mountains to the east. I took out my camera and started snapping photos, doing a slow panorama of the entire area. I wanted to document this section since it wasn't well mapped. As I was photographing, I noticed something else that made me pause. Near the base of the river where the gap ended, there appeared to be a dark spot, what looked like the entrance to a small cave or crevice. It was partially hidden by a rockfall, which is probably why it wasn't on any maps. I checked my watch, 10:15 a.m. I still had plenty of daylight, so I decided to make my way toward the cave entrance. It took me about an hour to navigate down from my position and across the basin. The closer I got to the river, the damper the ground became, and I found myself stepping carefully to avoid sinking into mud. When I was about 50 yards from what I now could clearly see was a cave entrance, I found another footprint. This one was perfect, a complete impression in soft mud. It was identical to the others, but even larger, easily 22 inches long. And it was fresh, very fresh. The edges hadn't even begun to dry. I froze. Whatever made this print had been here recently, very recently. I scanned the area, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. The cave entrance loomed ahead, a black void in the rock face. It was about 8 feet tall and maybe 5 feet wide, plenty big enough for whatever made that print to pass through. That's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing. Even the sound of the river seemed muted somehow. There was this heaviness to the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. The hair on my arms stood up, and it wasn't from the cold. I'm not ashamed to admit I was scared. Something about this place, about those prints, felt wrong, unnatural. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get back to the marked trails and civilization. But I'm a ranger. It's my job to document and understand the park. So I raised my camera and took several photos of the print, then a few of the cave entrance. I debated whether to go closer to the cave, but decided against it. Whatever made those prints could still be inside, and I wasn't about to find out what it was on my own. As I was putting my camera away, I heard it, a sound from inside the cave. It wasn't loud, just a subtle shifting, like something large moving over rock. Then a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, but definitely wasn't natural. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and started walking away, trying to keep my pace steady, even though every fiber of my being wanted to run. I made it about 20 yards before I heard another sound. Heavier this time, like something emerging from the cave. That's when I broke into a run. I didn't look back, just focused on making it to the gap as quickly as possible. The uneven terrain made running dangerous, and I fell twice, scraping my hands and knees on the rocks. The second time I fell, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, methodical footsteps, moving faster than seemed possible for something so large. I scrambled to my feet and kept going. The gap seemed impossibly far away. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but fear kept me moving. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. Whatever was following me was gaining ground. When I finally reached the base of the gap, I didn't stop to catch my breath. I clawed my way up the rocky slope, using both hands and feet to climb. Rocks dislodged under my weight, tumbling down behind me. I heard them hit something solid, followed by a sound I'll never forget, a deep, guttural vocalization that was almost human, but distorted somehow, like someone trying to speak underwater. I didn't look back. I squeezed through the narrowest part of the gap, scraping my shoulders on both sides. My backpack caught for a moment, and I nearly screamed in panic before it came free. I kept climbing, kept moving, until I finally emerged on the other side, back onto the marked trail. Only then did I turn around. The gap looked as peaceful and unremarkable as ever. There was no sign of pursuit, no indication that anything had followed me. But I could feel it. Something watching from the shadows within the crevice. I made it back to the ranger station in record time. My colleagues asked what happened when they saw my scraped hands and torn uniform, but I just mumbled something about losing my footing on a steep section. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. That evening, I downloaded the photos from my camera onto my laptop. My boyfriend Jake came over, and I showed him the panoramic shots of the basin. I didn't mention the footprints or the cave. I wanted to see if he'd notice anything unusual without me pointing it out. He was scrolling through the photos when he stopped on one of the wide shots of the basin. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the dark spot near the river. "It looks like a cave entrance," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Huh," he said, zooming in on the image. "That's weird. It doesn't look like you can get to it from the main trails." "You can't," I confirmed. "You have to go through the gap and navigate that whole basin area." He studied the photo more closely. "Has anyone mapped that cave system?" Not that I know of, I said. It's in a really remote section. Tourists never go there, and most rangers stick to the established areas. Jake looked at me curiously. So how did you get these photos? I hesitated, then showed him the pictures of the footprints. His eyes widened as he realized the scale. What the hell made these? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. They don't match anything we have on record. We spent hours that night researching, looking through wildlife databases, even checking cryptid forums online. Nothing matched what I'd seen. The next day, I reported the cave to my supervisor, saying I'd discovered it during a routine patrol, but hadn't had time to investigate further. I didn't mention the footprints or being chased. He made a note of it and said he'd add it to the list of areas to survey next season. I've been back to Jasper many times since that day, but I've never returned to the gap. Sometimes when I'm on patrol in that general area, I feel like I'm being watched from the tree line. And on particularly quiet nights, when the wind is blowing from that direction, I swear I can hear that same rumbling sound echoing across the mountains. I don't know what's living in that cave beyond the gap. I don't know what made those massive footprints. But I do know one thing. There are parts of Jasper National Park that should remain unexplored, shadows where something ancient and other still makes its home, far from human eyes. Story 10. I can't stop thinking about what happened. It's been over 4 years, but I still find myself lying awake some nights, replaying everything. In my mind, trying to make sense of it. I've never been the type to believe in cryptids or monsters, but what my siblings and I saw that day in the Washington wilderness has completely changed my perspective on what might be out there. It was July 7th, 2019. My brother David, my sister Sarah and I, Michael, had decided to take a day trip through the forests of northeast Skamania County. We'd grown up hiking and camping in Washington state, so we were no strangers to the outdoors or the wildlife you might encounter there. David was driving his Chevy Suburban, which we'd taken because of the rough terrain. The roads through that part of the county are mostly unpaved, just narrow gravel paths cutting through dense forest. The weather that day was perfect, sunny but not too hot, around 70 degrees with a light breeze. We'd packed sandwiches and drinks, planning to find a nice spot to have lunch and maybe do some hiking. David had this old Forest Service map he'd found online, and we were curious about exploring some of the more remote areas. We'd been on the road for maybe 3 hours, just taking our time, talking and enjoying the scenery. The Suburban was crawling along at maybe 10 to 15 miles per hour because the road was so rough, lots of potholes and loose gravel. The forest around us was incredibly thick, tall pines and firs creating a canopy so dense that in some spots it almost felt like twilight on the road. Around 1 in the afternoon, we came to this massive clearing that had obviously been logged not too long ago. It was stark compared to the lush forest we'd been driving through, just stumps and brush and fallen branches scattered across maybe 200 yards of open land. The trees resumed on the far side, creating this distinct line where the clearing ended and the dense forest began again. I was in the passenger seat just gazing out at the clearing when something at the far edge caught my eye. At first, I thought it might be a bear or maybe an elk, but as I focused on it, I realized it was neither. About 150 yards away, moving along the tree line, was this large, reddish-brown figure. It was moving quickly, too quickly for its size, and there was something deeply unsettling about the way it moved. Before I could even say anything, David suddenly hit the brakes, hard enough that Sarah let out a small yelp from the back seat. The car jerked to a stop, and David was already pointing toward the same spot I'd been staring at. "Do you see that?" he whispered, his voice tense. I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the figure. It was hunched over slightly as it ran, but it was clearly bipedal. The coloring was this deep reddish brown, like rust or old blood, and it had this thick, bulky frame that made it look powerful. "What are you guys looking at?" Sarah asked from the back, leaning forward between our seats, trying to spot what had us frozen. But by then, The creature had reached the edge of the forest and was pushing its way through the smaller trees, disappearing into the shadows. The way the trees bent aside as it moved through them, like they were nothing more than tall grass, sent a chill down my spine. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. The silence around us was profound. I hadn't noticed until that moment that all the normal forest sounds, birds, insects, the rustle of small animals, had completely stopped. The entire clearing was dead quiet, like everything was holding its breath. "What the hell was that?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David turned to me, his face pale. "You saw it too, right? I'm not going crazy?" I nodded again. "I saw it. It wasn't a bear." "No," David agreed. "Definitely not a bear." We started comparing what we'd seen. David described seeing a large, reddish-brown, hairy creature with a thick, muscular body. He said it was standing upright but hunched forward slightly, and he'd caught a glimpse of its profile when it turned briefly toward our direction. What struck him most was that it didn't have a distinct neck or snout like a bear would. Its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders. "It looked at us," he said, his voice still hushed. "It turned and looked right at us before it went into the trees." What David described matched exactly what I'd seen. The creature was broad and upright, moving with a stride and speed that seemed impossible for its bulk. I'd grown up seeing deer, elk, moose, and bears in these forests, and this moved like none of them. It had purpose and awareness in its movements. "How big do you think it was?" Sarah asked. She was clearly disappointed she hadn't gotten a good look at whatever we'd seen. David and I exchanged glances. "At least 6 feet tall," David said. But it wasn't just the height. It was massive, way bulkier than a person would be at that height. I agreed. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Too wide, too thick. We sat there debating whether to drive closer or not. Part of me wanted to go investigate, to confirm what we'd seen, but another part, the part that was making my heart race and my palms sweat, wanted to get as far away from that clearing as possible. Eventually, David put the car back in drive, and we continued forward slowly. As we moved deeper into the forest on the other side of the clearing, I noticed the normal sounds of the forest gradually returning, chirping birds, buzzing insects. The return of those sounds was almost as unnerving as their absence had been. It was like whatever presence had silenced the forest was now gone. We drove for another 20 minutes or so in relative silence, each lost in our own thoughts. We came to a small stream with a pull-off area where we could park, and David stopped the car. "Should we get out?" Sarah asked, sounding uncertain. I hesitated, scanning the tree line carefully. "I think it's long gone by now." We got out cautiously, stretching our legs, but staying close to the vehicle. David took out his phone and tried to get a signal, but there was nothing out here. I walked a little way up the stream, looking at the muddy bank where animals had clearly come to drink. There were tracks everywhere, deer mostly, but also what looked like wolf prints and the distinct 5-toed tracks of a bear, but nothing that matched what we'd seen. No tracks that could have been made by a 6-foot reddish-brown bipedal creature. "Guys!" I called out. "Come look at this!" David and Sarah joined me by the stream bank, and we spent some time examining the tracks. "If it came this way, it didn't stop for a drink," David said. "Do you think—" Sarah hesitated. "Do you think it was a Sasquatch? A Bigfoot?" The word had been hanging unspoken between us, but hearing it said out loud made me uncomfortable. I'd always dismissed Bigfoot stories as myths or misidentifications. But what else could explain what we'd seen? "I don't know what else it could have been," David admitted. "It wasn't a bear, wasn't an elk, definitely wasn't a person in a costume, not moving that fast through rough terrain." We decided to eat our lunch there by the stream, but the mood had changed. We kept scanning the trees, jumping at small sounds. What had started as a fun day trip had turned into something tense and unsettling. After lunch, we debated whether to continue on our planned route or head back. The forest suddenly seemed more threatening, less familiar. In the end, we decided to keep going, partly out of stubbornness and partly because we didn't want to pass that clearing again. As we drove deeper into the forest, the road got even rougher and the trees closed in around us. I found myself constantly scanning the woods, looking for any sign of movement, any flash of reddish-brown among the green. Around 3 in the afternoon, we came to another clearing, smaller than the first, and natural rather than logged. David slowed the Suburban to a crawl as we approached. "Should we stop?" he asked. Before I could answer, Sarah suddenly grabbed my shoulder from the back seat. "There!" she hissed, pointing toward the far side of the clearing. My blood ran cold as I followed her finger. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees and underbrush. But then I caught a subtle movement, a shifting of shadows that didn't match the breeze. Something was there, partially concealed behind a large pine tree. David cut the engine, and we sat in silence, straining to see. "Is it the same one?" Sarah whispered. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I can't see it clearly." We sat there for what felt like an eternity, watching the spot where we'd seen movement. The forest had gone silent again, that same unnatural hush that had fallen over the first clearing. Then we heard it, a deep, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, but couldn't be mistaken for anything natural. It seemed to vibrate through the car, through our bodies. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I felt a primal fear unlike anything I'd experienced before. "Start the car," I said to David, my voice tight. "Start the car now." David turned the key, and the engine roared to life. As it did, there was movement at the edge of the clearing, just a flash of that same reddish-brown color disappearing into the trees. David didn't hesitate. He threw the Suburban into reverse, turned around in the clearing, and headed back the way we'd come, driving faster than was safe on the rough road. None of us complained about the bumpy ride. We didn't speak much on the drive back. What was there to say? We'd all experienced something we couldn't explain, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the forests we'd grown up in. It wasn't until we were back on paved roads, heading toward civilization, that Sarah broke the silence. "What do we tell people?" she asked quietly. David and I exchanged looks. Who would believe us? We had no photos, no evidence, just our word that we'd seen something impossible in the forests of Skamania County. "Maybe we don't tell anyone," David suggested. "Not yet, anyway." I agreed, and Sarah nodded reluctantly. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure moving along the tree line, too big, too fast, too wrong. I kept hearing that deep, vibrating sound that had shaken me to my core. It's been 4 years since that day, and I still don't know what to make of what we saw. I've researched Sasquatch sightings in Washington state, and there have been hundreds reported in Skamania County alone. Some of the descriptions match what we saw with uncanny accuracy. I find myself looking at the forests differently now when I drive through them. I scan the tree lines, the shadows between trunks. I listen for that unnatural silence that fell over the clearing before we saw it. Sometimes I think about going back, trying to find evidence, trying to make sense of what happened, but then I remember that sound, that feeling of ancient primal fear, and I know I never will. Some things are better left undisturbed in the deep forests of Washington state. I've never told this story publicly before. Even now, writing it out, I feel a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief to finally share it, anxiety about being dismissed or ridiculed. But I know what I saw. My siblings know what they saw. And somewhere in the forests of Skamania County, something is moving that shouldn't exist, but does. Story 11. I still can't explain what happened to me and my buddy Jake that day in December 2010. It's been over 13 years, and I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. I'm sharing this now because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar in the Shauny National Forest. It was the final week of deer season. Jake and I had been planning this hunting trip for months. We're both experienced hunters. I've been hunting since I was 12, and Jake's family has owned land near the Shauny National Forest for generations. We know what we're doing out there, and we know what animals sound like. What we heard that day wasn't any animal native to southern Illinois. Hell, I don't think it was native to North America. We arrived at our campsite near Lust Creek on a Friday afternoon. The weather was perfect for deer hunting, cold enough that the deer would be moving, but not so frigid that we'd be miserable sitting in our stands. After setting up camp, we scouted the area and picked our spots for the morning hunt. We decided to set up about 200 yards apart to cover more ground. Jake took the ridge overlooking a small valley, while I positioned myself near a game trail that showed plenty of recent deer activity. Saturday morning started like any other hunting day. We were up before dawn, had a quick breakfast of instant coffee and protein bars, and headed out to our stands in the dark. The forest was still and quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves as small creatures moved through the underbrush. As the sun came up, I spotted a few squirrels and a raccoon, but no deer. By mid-morning, around 10:30 or so, I was starting to get restless. That's when everything changed. It started with a sound I still can't properly describe, a deep, loud whooping or howling that echoed through the trees. At first I thought it might be someone messing around, but it was too powerful, too primal. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard either. The closest I can come to describing it is maybe a cross between a gorilla and a coyote, but even that doesn't quite capture it. The call had this rhythmic quality to it, whoop, 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 that repeated 3 or 4 times. The most disturbing part was how I could literally feel the noise vibrating in my chest. It was that powerful. I've heard elk bugle up close, and this was at least twice as loud and much deeper in pitch. I immediately raised my rifle and scanned the area, thinking maybe it was another hunter playing a recording to scare off competition or something stupid like that. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This sound was too organic, too alive. Then I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps crashing through the underbrush somewhere between where Jake and I were positioned. Not four-legged movement like a deer or bear, this was distinctly bipedal. Each impact landed with enough force to snap thick branches underfoot. Whatever it was big and heavy. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. I clicked the safety off my rifle, even though I couldn't see anything through the dense forest. The footsteps continued, and I realized with growing unease that they seemed to be moving in a pattern, like whatever it was circling, pacing between our positions with purpose. Not random movement, but deliberate. I reached for my two-way radio with shaking hands and whispered, "Jake, you hearing this?" There was a moment of static. Then Jake's voice came through, tight with tension. "Yeah, what the fuck is that?" "I don't know, but it's between us. Can you see anything?" "Nothing, but it's big, man. Really big." Just as Jake finished speaking, the whooping sound came again, closer this time. Whoop, whoop, whoop. I swear it was less than 100 yards from my position. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt true fear in the woods. The kind of primal fear our ancestors must have felt before they had weapons or fire. The footsteps resumed, heavier and faster now. I heard the crack of a substantial branch, the kind that would take serious weight to break. Whatever this thing was, it had to be at least 300 pounds, maybe more. "Jake," I whispered into the radio again, "I think we should get out of here." No response, just static. "Jake, you there?" After a few seconds of silence that felt like an eternity, the radio crackled back to life. "Don't move. Jake's voice was barely audible. "I think it's closer to you now." He was right. The footsteps had changed direction and were now definitely heading toward my position. I raised my rifle again, aiming in the direction of the sounds, but the forest was too dense to see more than 30 yards in any direction. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The footsteps, the whooping, everything, just complete silence. And I mean complete silence. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Anyone who spends time in the woods knows that's not natural. There's always some ambient sound in a forest. This silence was deafening and far more terrifying than the strange noises had been. For 2 or 3 minutes I sat frozen in my stand, rifle ready, barely breathing. The silence pressed in from all sides. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Jake," I whispered into the radio, "I'm coming to you. Stay put." I climbed down from my stand as quietly as possible, keeping my rifle ready. Every snap of a twig under my boots made me flinch. I moved slowly toward Jake's position, constantly scanning the trees around me. When I finally reached Jake's stand, I found him white as a sheet, rifle clutched in a death grip. He climbed down, and without saying a word, we started back toward our campsite. We didn't run. Running in the woods is a good way to get hurt, but we moved as quickly and quietly as we could. Only when we reached the relative safety of our camp did we speak. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice still shaking. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, man. I've been hunting these woods my whole life and never heard anything like it." We decided to break camp early. Neither of us wanted to admit we were scared, but we both knew we weren't going back into those woods that day. As we packed up, we discussed what we'd experienced. Could it have been a bear? I suggested, knowing full well it wasn't. "Bears don't make sounds like that," Jake replied, "and they don't walk on 2 legs for that long." "Maybe someone was messing with us, playing some kind of prank?" Jake gave me a look. "You felt that sound in your chest, same as me. That wasn't a recording or someone yelling, and whoever it was would have had to be 7 feet tall and 300 pounds to make those footsteps." We spent the rest of the afternoon driving home, both of us unusually quiet. That night, after a few beers, we started researching online. We found some stories about strange encounters in the Shauny National Forest, mostly dismissed as tall tales or misidentifications, but nothing that matched exactly what we'd experienced. Over the years, I've gone back and forth about what happened that day. The rational part of my brain says it must have been some kind of animal, maybe a bear with an unusual vocalization, or even multiple animals creating the illusion of something else. But the part of me that was there, that felt that sound in my chest and heard those deliberate bipedal footsteps, that part knows we encountered something that shouldn't exist in the forests of southern Illinois. Jake and I still hunt together, but we've never gone back to that part of Shawnee. Neither of us has ever heard that sound again, and honestly, I hope I never do. Sometimes when I'm in the woods alone and the wind dies down, leaving that perfect silence, I find myself holding my breath, listening for that deep, resonant whoop, whoop, whoop. What bothers me most isn't just what we might have encountered, but how it behaved. This wasn't random animal movement. Whatever was out there seemed to be deliberately pacing between us, circling, getting closer. It knew we were there. It was aware of us. And for those few minutes, it felt like it was studying us, deciding what to do. I've told this story to a few other hunters over the years. Most laugh it off or suggest we encountered a known animal in unusual circumstances. A few have shared their own strange experiences, though nothing quite like ours. One older hunter got real quiet after I told him and just said, "Some things in these woods are best left alone." I don't know what was in the forest with us that December morning. I don't know why it approached us or why it suddenly went silent and seemingly disappeared. All I know is that something was out there that doesn't fit into my understanding of what exists in North American forests, and 13 years later, I still think about it almost every time I go hunting. If anyone else has had a similar experience near Lust Creek or anywhere in the Shauny National Forest, please share it. I need to know we weren't just imagining things, that what we experienced was real. Because if it was real, then there's something out there in the woods that science hasn't explained yet, something that's watching and aware. And that thought keeps me up at night more often than I'd like to admit. Story 12. I've been putting off talking about this for a long time, 3 years to be exact. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and what I saw in January of 2020 still haunts me every time I go into the field alone. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I've encountered bears, cougars, even had a few run-ins with illegal marijuana grow operations in my 15 years working in remote areas. But this was different. This was wrong. It was a cold, damp Thursday morning. We'd had light rain the night before, and everything was dripping and grey. Typical Oregon winter weather. I was set to conduct stream surveys along Sandstone Creek, monitoring coho salmon populations. This was routine work for me, something I'd done hundreds of times before. My colleague Dave dropped me off near an old decommissioned logging road around 7:30 in the morning. The plan was simple. I'd follow the road about 1.5 miles, then cut down to the creek where I'd start my survey work. Dave would drive around to the exit point downstream and wait for me to finish my section, which would take roughly 4 to 5 hours. "See you around noon," Dave said as I grabbed my backpack and survey equipment. "Radio if you need anything." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the dripping trees and the mist rising from the ground. The old logging road was overgrown in places, but still easy enough to follow. It was unusually quiet that morning. No birds, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. At the time, I just thought it was the weather keeping the wildlife quiet. Now I wonder if they knew something I didn't. I was about 3/4 of a mile in when I first felt something was off. It's hard to explain, but anyone who spends enough time in the wilderness develops a kind of sixth sense. The forest just felt wrong, tense, like the air before a massive thunderstorm. I stopped to check my GPS and take a drink of water, scanning the trees around me. Nothing seemed obviously out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I chalked it up to nerves and kept moving. I reached the point where I needed to leave the road and head down toward the creek. The slope was moderate, with patches of older growth forest mixed with sections that had been replanted after logging maybe 5 or 6 years ago. These younger trees were about 5 feet tall, creating an uneven patchwork across the hillside. That's when I saw it. I'd just paused at the edge of the road, looking for the best route down, when movement caught my eye maybe 50 yards ahead. Something was standing in the middle of the old road, something big. My first thought was bear, but I dismissed it immediately. This was no bear. It was standing fully upright, and even from that distance I could tell it was tall, much taller than me, and I'm 6'1". It saw me before I fully processed what I was looking at, the way it moved. God, I still see it when I close my eyes. In one fluid motion, it turned and bolted uphill, away from the creek and deeper into the forest. The movement wasn't like anything I've ever seen, not human, not animal. It was effortless, impossibly fast, and completely silent. No crashing through underbrush, no sound of footfalls, just this fluid motion. It ran through a stretch of those replanted trees, and that's when I got a better sense of its size. It towered at least 2 feet above those 5-foot trees, 7 feet minimum, maybe taller. I could only see it from about the chest up as it moved. But what really got to me wasn't just the size, it was the color. Whatever covered its body, fur, skin, I couldn't tell, was the darkest black I've ever seen. Not like a black bear's fur that still reflects some light. This was like a void, like it was absorbing the light around it. An unnatural, impossible black. And its head, Jesus. Its head wasn't right. It was elongated upward, almost cone-shaped. No animal on Earth has a head shaped like that. I've studied evolutionary biology. I know animal anatomy. This thing's morphology didn't make sense. It disappeared into the denser forest within seconds, moving with that impossible speed and silence. I stood frozen, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me wanted to run back to the drop-off point and radio Dave to come get me, but that would mean admitting what I'd seen. And how could I explain it? I couldn't even explain it to myself. I checked my watch. It was 8:15. I still had over 4 hours of work ahead of me, alone in this forest. The thought of continuing down to that creek made me physically ill. But I'm a professional. I had a job to do. And maybe, I thought, maybe I'd just seen a bear in poor light conditions. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I knew that was bullshit even as I thought it. I forced myself to continue, descending carefully to the creek. Every few steps I'd stop and look around, listening intently. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. The survey work required me to wade in the creek, measuring flow rates, taking water samples, and counting salmon redds, nests. Normally I lose myself in this work. I love it. But that day, I couldn't focus. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark form watching me from the trees. Around 9:30, I heard something large move through the forest about 50 yards upstream. I froze mid-step, water swirling around my waders. I strained to see through the trees, but the undergrowth was too thick. The movement stopped. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, it started again, moving parallel to the creek in the same direction I was heading. I stood absolutely still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two. Then I continued my work, moving as quietly as possible. I didn't want to attract attention, but I also didn't want whatever it was to know I was afraid. By 10 o'clock, I was convinced I was being stalked. The movement would stop when I stopped, continue when I continued, always just out of sight, always silent except for the occasional snap of a branch or rustle of leaves. It was coordinated, deliberate movement, not random forest noise. I tried radioing Dave, but the terrain must have been blocking the signal. All I got was static. I was completely alone with whatever was following me. At around 10:30, I rounded a bend in the creek and saw something that stopped me cold. On a muddy section of bank, clearly visible, was a footprint, but not like any footprint I'd ever seen. It was huge, easily 16 inches long and oddly shaped, with what looked like 3 large toes or pads. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was extremely heavy. I took out my phone to photograph it, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone into the creek. I managed to fish it out immediately, but it was dead, no photo evidence, just what I saw with my own eyes. I abandoned any pretense of continuing the survey. I needed to get to the exit point where Dave was waiting. I began moving downstream as fast as I safely could while still in the creek. Getting out would mean moving through the dense forest where I knew it was waiting. At one point, I heard a sound that still wakes me up at night. A low, reverberating sound, not quite a growl, not quite a hum. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating in my chest more than registering in my ears. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. I picked up my pace, slipping on rocks, not caring about the noise I was making anymore. I just needed to get out. The movement in the forest kept pace with me. Whatever it was fast enough to keep up with me without effort. Around 11:15, I saw something that made my blood run cold. About 30 yards ahead, through a gap in the trees, I caught a glimpse of it standing completely still, just watching me. From that distance and angle, all I could make out clearly was that impossible black form and the strange, elongated head. It was partially obscured by a tree, but I could tell it was massive, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it stepped behind the tree and was gone. No sound, no movement of branches, just gone. I don't remember much of the next half hour. I moved as fast as I could downstream, falling several times, cutting my hand on a rock, not caring. All I knew was I needed to reach Dave and the truck. When I finally saw the bridge that marked the exit point, I nearly cried with relief. Dave was leaning against the truck, looking bored. He straightened up when he saw me coming, concern crossing his face. "What happened to you?" he asked as I stumbled up the bank toward him. I must have looked terrible, soaking wet, bleeding from my hand, wild-eyed with fear. I couldn't tell him. How could I? "I fell," I said. "A few times. Creeks running faster than usual." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he didn't push it. We loaded my equipment in silence, and I insisted we leave immediately. On the drive back, Dave tried to make conversation, but I couldn't focus. I kept seeing that thing in my mind, its impossible movement, that unnatural black, the cone-shaped head. Everything I knew about North American wildlife told me nothing like that should exist. Yet I'd seen it. It had stalked me for hours. I never filed a report about what happened. Who would believe me? I'd be labeled the crazy biologist who sees monsters in the woods, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar, wasn't a person in a suit. It was something other. I still do field work. I have to. It's my job, but never alone anymore. I've requested a permanent partner for safety reasons, and my supervisor approved it without many questions. I've never gone back to that section of Sandstone Creek, making excuses whenever it comes up in the rotation. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, watching from the trees, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if there are more of them. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late and past the dark line of trees along the highway, I swear I can see movement just inside the forest edge, something tall and impossibly black, keeping pace with my car just out of the light. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't want to know. But it saw me, and I can't shake the feeling that somehow it remembers me too. Story 13. I've held this story inside for 18 years, and I'm still not sure if I should be sharing it. But after seeing others post similar experiences, I think it's time. I need to get this off my chest. This happened on February 6th, 2005, in Red Lake, Minnesota. If you've never been, it's a small town where nothing much happens, especially in winter. I was 32 then, living in my parents' old house after they moved to Arizona. Their golden retriever, Max, stayed with me because my dad's arthritis made it hard to walk him. That morning was cold but bearable, around 15 degrees with a clear sky. We'd had about 8 inches of snow a few days before, but the plows had cleared most roads, and the rest had a crunchy layer on top, the kind that makes that satisfying crunch when you step on it. I took Max out around 7 in the morning, just as the sun was coming up. We had this routine, down Maple Street, past the old Peterson place, then along the tree line that separates the town from the thicker woods. Max loved that route because he could sniff around the trees without me worrying about him running off too far. We were about 20 minutes into our walk when Max suddenly stopped. His whole body language changed. See, Max was this happy-go-lucky dog who bounced around like he was still a puppy despite being 8 years old. But right then, he went rigid. His ears perked up and he started making this low, whining sound I'd never heard before. At first, I thought maybe he'd spotted a deer or fox. We get them sometimes. But then I noticed what he was staring at. There were tracks in the snow leading from the woods toward town. Not animal tracks like I was used to seeing. These were footprints, human-like footprints, except they were massive. I've been hunting since I was 12. I know what bear tracks look like. I know moose, deer, every animal in these parts. These weren't animal tracks. They were clearly foot-shaped, 5 toes, an arch, a heel, but enormous. I pulled Max closer and walked up to one of the prints. My winter boot, a men's size 10, fit entirely inside one of these tracks with room to spare. I'd guess they were easily 17 inches long, maybe more. The stride between Them was what really got me. Whoever or whatever made these tracks had to be incredibly tall. The distance between each footprint was at least 5 feet. I'm 5'8", and I had to stretch uncomfortably to match the stride. The tracks were deep too, maybe 4 inches down into the snow, which had that crusty top layer. That meant whatever made them was heavy, really heavy. Max kept whining and pulling at his leash, not toward the tracks, but away from them. He wasn't acting like himself at all. This dog, who would chase squirrels fearlessly, was now tucking his tail and trying to drag me back home. But curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the tracks, just for a little bit, to see where they went. They formed an almost perfectly straight line, like whatever made them knew exactly where it was going. No wandering, no hesitation. The tracks led straight toward Red Lake Elementary School, which was only a few blocks away. As we got closer to the school, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The tracks went directly up to the chain-link fence surrounding the playground, and then continued on the other side. The fence wasn't damaged or bent, just crossed somehow, like whatever made these prints had simply stepped over an 8-foot fence without breaking stride. Inside the school grounds, the pattern changed. The tracks wandered around the playground equipment, circled the swing set, and approached several classroom windows. It was like whatever made them was curious, looking in, checking things out. Thank God it was Sunday, and no kids were there. By this point, Max was practically dragging me away. I've never seen him so desperate to leave a place. I took a few pictures with my flip phone, though the quality was terrible. Then I followed the tracks to where they exited the school property, again, right over another section of fence, and headed into the residential area where the Hendersons and Patels lived. I didn't follow any further. Max was too agitated, and honestly, I was starting to feel uneasy myself. There was something deeply wrong about those tracks. I headed home, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. When I got back, I called my neighbor Tom, who'd been the town's sheriff before retiring 3 years earlier. He came over and I showed him the photos. He didn't laugh or dismiss them like I half expected. Instead, he got this serious look and told me the Hendersons had called him that morning about strange tracks crossing their yard. Tom and I walked back to the school and he examined the tracks carefully. He took measurements and photos with his digital camera. The whole time, he kept shaking his head and muttering to himself. When I asked what he thought, he just said, "Nothing that makes any sense, Sarah." As we were heading back, we ran into Mrs. Patel. She was bundled up in her winter coat, walking her little terrier. As soon as she saw us, she hurried over. "Did you see those strange footprints too?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "They went right between my garage and back door. My dog woke me up around 2 in the morning, barking like crazy. I've never heard him so worked up." Tom asked if she'd seen anything, and she shook her head. "Just heard the barking. But Mr. Larson across the street said he heard something strange last night, like a woman crying." That's when I remembered something. I'd woken up briefly during the night because Max was growling at my bedroom window. I'd assumed it was just a raccoon or stray cat and had fallen back asleep. But now I wondered. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, at least a dozen people had come forward with stories. The Johanssons said the tracks crossed their front yard and stepped right over a plastic lawn chair that had been half buried in snow, crushing it flat. Old Mrs. Weber, who lived closest to the river, said she'd been awakened by what sounded like a woman in distress. "But not quite right," she said. "It was like someone trying to sound like a woman crying, too drawn out, too deliberate." Several people reported their dogs going berserk around 2 a.m. The Carlsons' German Shepherd had scratched their back door so frantically trying to get inside that he'd torn up his paws. We followed the tracks as far as we could. They came from the direction of the frozen river, cut through town, past the school, through several yards, and then headed back toward the deeper woods north of town. The entire path was almost perfectly straight, except for the detour around the school. By late afternoon, about 20 of us had gathered at Tom's house to discuss what we'd found. Someone suggested calling the DNR, or maybe even the FBI, but Tom was hesitant. "And tell them what exactly?" he asked. "That we found big footprints in the snow." That's when Billy Redfeather, one of the older men from the reservation, spoke up. He'd been quiet the whole time, just listening. "My grandfather used to talk about the tall ones," he said softly. "They come from the old forests. They're curious about us, but they don't want to be seen. They can make sounds like a woman crying to lure people out at night." The room went silent. Nobody wanted to say the word that was on all our minds: Bigfoot. I'd never believed in that stuff. Still don't know if I do. But those tracks were real. The fear in Max and the other dogs was real. Whatever walked through our town that night was real. We took more pictures the next day, but a warm spell hit that afternoon, and the snow started melting. By the following morning, most of the tracks were just vague depressions in the slush. Life went back to normal pretty quickly. People stopped talking about it after a few weeks. I guess it's easier to forget something you can't explain, but I didn't forget. I still take Max on different routes now. We don't walk by those woods anymore, and on winter nights when the snow is fresh, I double-check my locks and keep the outdoor lights on until morning. I don't know what visited Red Lake that February night. Maybe it was some elaborate prank, though nobody ever came forward to claim it. Maybe it was something else, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but somehow does anyway. All I know is that sometimes when I'm walking Max and we get near those woods, he still stops and stares, ears perked up, body tense. And I wonder if whatever made those tracks is still out there, watching us from the trees, curious about our little town and the people in it. Story 14. I've been a hunter all my life. Grew up in eastern Lewis County, learned to track deer before I could even ride a bike properly. My dad taught me everything: how to move quietly through the forest, how to read animal signs, how to respect the wilderness. I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand, but what happened in 2012 shook me to my core, and I still can't explain it. It was the first morning of deer season, mid-October. I remember it was chilly, that perfect kind of fall morning when your breath makes little clouds and the whole forest feels crisp and alive. I'd gotten up at 4:30, made coffee, packed my gear the night before like I always do. Nothing unusual about my routine. I'd been looking forward to this day for months. I left my cabin around 5:15, still completely dark out. I had this spot I'd been watching for weeks, had seen a nice buck there during scouting trips. The plan was to be in position before first light, which was around 6:45 that time of year. I was driving my old Chevy pickup along the main road that runs parallel to the Cowlitz River. If you know the area, it's that stretch where the road's elevated a bit, and you can see down into the river bottoms, all that tangle of driftwood, fallen trees and brush that builds up over the years of flooding. The eastern sky was just starting to lighten, not quite dawn yet, but enough that you could make out shapes and silhouettes. I was only going about 20 miles per hour, wasn't in a rush, and the road's pretty rough there. I always scan the surroundings while I drive, force of habit from decades of hunting. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear sitting on one of those massive logs that had washed up during the spring floods, but something about it immediately felt wrong. It was sitting there just watching the river. The posture was all wrong for a bear. It was sitting upright, but hunched forward slightly. I could see it clearly in profile against the lighter sky background. This thing was massive, completely covered in thick, shaggy hair, dark brown, almost black in that early light. What really got me was the shape of it. The head wasn't round like ours. It was sort of conical, tucked down low between what looked like incredibly powerful shoulders. No neck that I could see. And the legs, Jesus, the legs were huge, disproportionately thick compared to anything human. It all happened in maybe 3 or 4 seconds as I drove by, but that image is burned into my brain. I know what bears look like. I've hunted them, observed them for hours. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a coat either. No coat moves like that, like it was part of the body. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't stop. Some instinct told me that would be a bad idea. I drove to the intersection about a quarter-mile ahead, turned around, and headed back. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me was hoping it was still there, that I could get a better look and confirm what I'd seen. Another part was terrified of exactly that. When I got back to the spot, maybe 2 minutes later, whatever it was had vanished. I pulled over, grabbed my binoculars from the passenger seat, and scanned the area. Nothing. The river makes a natural bend there, with a high embankment about 30 yards from where it had been sitting. Perfect cover for a quick retreat. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just watching and listening. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birds singing, no small animals moving around. Just the sound of the river and my own breathing. I know enough about the woods to know that silence usually means something's wrong. I never made it to my hunting spot that day. I couldn't shake what I'd seen, couldn't focus on anything else. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold, trying to make sense of it. The thing is, that area has always had a strangeness to it. When I was a kid hunting with my dad in those same river bottoms, we'd hear things sometimes, things that didn't make sense. Dad never seemed scared exactly, but he was always alert, cautious. He told me once that he always felt like something was following us when we hunted there, but that it meant no harm. Just curious, he said. I thought he was just trying to make me feel better, but now I wonder. The valley just north of our land has this nickname among the old-timers, Screaming Woman Valley. They called it that because during the cold months, people would hear these awful, prolonged screams echoing through the river bottoms. They'd say it was bobcats or lynx, but anyone who's heard both knows that's not quite right. These screams were different, longer, more powerful, almost human, but not quite. After what I saw that morning, all these memories came flooding back. Things I'd heard in those woods over the years that never quite added up. Times when I felt watched while hunting alone, the way my dog would sometimes refuse to go into certain sections of the forest, hackles raised, whining like he was terrified. I've spent years thinking about what I saw that morning. I've compared my experience with other accounts, researched similar sightings in the Pacific Northwest. I've talked to a few trusted friends who've had their own unexplainable encounters in those woods. The more I think about it, the more certain I am that what I saw sitting quietly by that river as dawn broke wasn't a bear, and it sure as hell wasn't a man. It was a Sasquatch. Nothing else fits. The size, the posture, the way it moved when I glimpsed it turning its head slightly as I drove past, like it heard my truck but wasn't particularly concerned, like it belonged there more than I did. I've gone back to that spot dozens of times since then, always hoping and dreading I might see it again. Never have. But sometimes I'll find strange broken branches, too high up for a person to reach. Or I'll notice areas where the underbrush has been cleared in a way that doesn't make sense for any known animal. Once I found a footprint, at least I think it was, nearly 16 inches long in some mud by the riverbank. By the time I came back with a camera, the rain had washed it away. I still hunt those woods, still love them, but I move through them differently now, more aware, more humble. I realize now that for all my years of experience, there are things in these forests that we don't understand, that have probably been there long before us. The strangest part, I'm not afraid anymore. That initial fear has been replaced by a kind of reverence. Whatever I saw that morning wasn't threatening me. It was just existing, going about its day in a place it probably considers home. It was me who was the intruder. I've told this story to very few people. Most would think I'm crazy or making it up. But I know what I saw. It was just for a few seconds in the half-light of dawn, but it changed everything I thought I knew about these woods I've spent my entire life in. Sometimes at night, when I'm sitting on my porch and the wind is right, I hear sounds coming from the direction of the river, not quite howls, not quite screams, something in between. And I wonder if it's still out there, moving silently through the wilderness, watching us more than we realize. That day in 2012 taught me that no matter how well you think you know something, nature always holds secrets. The wilderness I've walked through my entire life suddenly became larger, more mysterious. And in a strange way, I'm grateful for that glimpse of something unexplainable. It reminded me that we don't know everything, that there's still mystery in this world. I've never seen it again, at least not clearly. But sometimes, when I'm deep in those woods alone, I get that feeling of being watched. And I'll catch movement out of the corner of my eye, or hear something large moving through the underbrush that doesn't sound like any deer or elk I've ever tracked. And I wonder, the memory of that morning hasn't faded at all. That massive, hair-covered figure sitting by the river in the early dawn light, the strange, conical head, those impossibly thick legs, the way it seemed so at home, so natural in that wild place. It's as clear in my mind today as it was 11 years ago. I don't try to convince anyone anymore. I know what I saw, and I think there are others out there who've seen similar things, but stay quiet for the same reasons I did for years. Who wants to be the crazy guy who claims he saw Bigfoot? But I'm 60 now, and I care less about what people think. I know the truth of what I experienced. That morning changed me, made me question everything I thought I knew about these forests I've spent my life in. And it taught me that sometimes the most incredible things happen in just a few seconds. Moments that you carry with you forever, that alter how you see the world around you. Story 15. I've been sitting on this story for over 40 years, and even now my hands are shaking as I type this. I'm a 60-year-old man now, but I can still feel the terror of that morning in the Minnesota woods like it happened yesterday. I've told this to maybe 3 people my entire life, and each time they look at me like I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But what happened that day in 1979 changed me forever. I was 16 back then, living with my parents on our property that backed up against a huge stretch of dense forest in rural Minnesota. Being a country kid, I'd been running trap lines since I was 12. It was good money for a teenager. Raccoon pelts were fetching about $12 each that year, which was decent cash in those days. I had a 4-mile route that zigzagged through the woods, and I'd check it most mornings before school. My companion on these trips was always my Springer Spaniel, Sadie. That dog followed me everywhere, especially into those woods. She was the best hunting dog I'd ever seen, brave, smart, and completely fearless. It was late October, about 2 weeks before Halloween. The morning was unusually dark because a storm had passed through overnight, leaving behind heavy cloud cover. I remember the temperature had dropped sharply. My breath was making thick clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I'd woken up around 5 that morning, dressed in my usual gear, flannel shirt, canvas jacket, jeans, and boots. I packed light, just my small day pack with some jerky water and an extra flashlight. I had my main flashlight, my hunting knife, and of course, Sadie. We'd been out for maybe 45 minutes and had already collected 2 raccoons from my traps. I'd skinned them on the spot, something I'd done hundreds of times, and packed the pelts in my backpack. Everything felt normal at first. The woods were quiet in that early morning way, just the occasional rustle of leaves or distant owl. Sadie was trotting ahead of me like usual, occasionally circling back. I think it was around 6:30 when I first felt it. That feeling, anyone who's spent time alone in the wilderness knows what I'm talking about. That sudden, inexplicable certainty that you're being watched. At first I tried to shake it off. The woods play tricks on your mind, especially in the half-dark. But then Sadie changed. She stopped dead in her tracks about 10 yards ahead of me, her ears perked up. Then she did something I'd never seen her do before. She started growling low in her throat and backing up toward me. Sadie wasn't a dog that spooked easily. She'd faced down coyotes and even stood her ground against a black bear once. But now she was pressing against my legs, still growling, her eyes fixed on something in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, but I already knew something was wrong. Very wrong. I decided to keep going. My next trap was only about a quarter-mile ahead, and after that, we'd start heading back toward home. But that feeling of being watched didn't fade. It got stronger. And that's when I started hearing the footsteps. They were subtle at first. Just the soft crunch of leaves and twigs behind us, maybe 100 yards back. What made it especially unsettling was how the sounds would stop whenever I stopped. I'd pause, and within a second, the forest behind me would go completely silent. Then, when I'd start walking again, the sounds would resume, only slightly closer. Sadie was practically glued to my heels now, occasionally looking up at me with these eyes that seemed to be begging me to turn around. But I kept going, convincing myself it was just a deer or maybe even my imagination. The woods can make you paranoid, I told myself. After another 300 yards or so, I couldn't take it anymore. The footsteps had gotten closer, and now I could swear I heard something else, a soft, rhythmic sound that almost resembled breathing, but deeper and somehow wrong. I stopped and pulled out my larger flashlight, a heavy mag light that I'd gotten for my birthday that year. It was much brighter than my smaller one. I swept the beam behind us, trying to penetrate the darkness between the trees. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the familiar trunks and undergrowth. Then, about 75 yards back, the light caught something that made my blood turn to ice. Two figures. They were standing motionless between the trees, partially obscured by the underbrush. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, and had a vaguely humanoid shape, but something was off about them. They weren't people. I know that sounds crazy, but they just weren't. The proportions were wrong. Their arms hung too low, and their shoulders were too broad. I couldn't make out any facial features at that distance, but I could see that they were covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Bears? No, they were standing too upright. People in costumes, out here at 6:30 in the morning, miles from any road? It didn't make sense. I kept sweeping my light, hoping I was just seeing things. About 30 yards to the right of the two figures, I caught what looked like a tree stump. Except tree stumps don't have fur, and they definitely don't have steam rising from them in the cold morning air. As I focused on it, I realized with horror that it was crouched down, like an animal waiting to pounce. Then I moved my light slightly to the right, and my heart nearly stopped. A reddish-yellow reflection, like when you shine a light into a dog's eyes at night. Except this reflection was about 4 feet off the ground, and it was moving. A third creature had somehow circled around and gotten within 50 yards of us. I remember swallowing hard, my mouth suddenly bone dry. I clicked off the flashlight and whispered to Sadie, "We gotta go. Now." I knew the edge of the forest was about 30 yards ahead, opening into Old Man Hawkins' pasture field. If we could just reach the field, we'd be in the open, where I could see better and maybe have a chance to outrun whatever these things were. Sadie looked up at me with what I can only describe as a pleading expression. Then we ran. I've never run so fast in my life. The forest floor was slick with morning dew and fallen leaves, making it treacherous, but terror gave me a kind of superhuman coordination. Sadie was right beside me, no longer the brave hunting dog, but a frightened animal fleeing for her life. Behind us, all pretense of stealth was gone. Something, multiple somethings, were crashing through the underbrush. The sound was deafening, breaking branches, pounding footsteps, and a weird, high-pitched chattering noise that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. I could see the tree line ahead, the darkness of the woods giving way to the slightly lighter gray of the open field beyond. But there was a problem. Old Man Hawkins had put up a barbed wire fence to keep his cattle from wandering into the forest. It wasn't tall, maybe 3 feet high, but it was an obstacle. When we reached the fence, Sadie immediately dropped to her belly and squeezed underneath. I threw my backpack over the fence and then dove for the ground, scrambling to get under the lowest wire. As I was halfway through, I felt it. Something brushed against the sole of my boot. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was certain that if I did, I'd see a massive hand or claw closing around my ankle. Somehow, I made it under and scrambled to my feet on the other side. Only then did I turn around, my flashlight clutched in my shaking hand. I swept the beam along the edge of the woods and caught a glimpse of what had been chasing us. I only saw it for a split second, but that image is burned into my brain forever. Fur, dark, matted fur covering a massive body. The creature had to be at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders twice as broad as mine. It was standing just inside the tree line, partially hidden by a large oak. But what I'll never forget was what happened next. The thing lifted its face toward the sky at about a 45-degree angle, opened what I can only describe as a mouth, and let out a sound that still haunts my nightmares. It wasn't a roar or a scream in the conventional sense. It was something else entirely. A high-pitched, almost metallic shriek that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. It felt like it was penetrating my skull, rattling my teeth in their sockets. And then the smell hit me. People talk about the stench associated with these things, but that's not quite right. It was sweet and repulsive at the same time, like rotting fruit mixed with wet fur and something else, something chemical and alien. The odor was so thick I could taste it, and it made me gag uncontrollably. What happened next is what truly terrifies me to this day. The creature could have easily jumped that fence. It could have been on me in seconds, but it didn't. It just stood there, watching me with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like burning coals. It was like it was studying me, memorizing me. Then it simply turned and melted back into the darkness of the forest, taking its companions with it. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two, my body shaking so badly I could barely remain standing. Sadie was whimpering at my feet, pressing against my legs. When I finally managed to move, I ran all the way home without stopping once, Sadie right beside me. My parents were in the kitchen when I burst through the back door, wild-eyed and gasping for breath. I tried to tell them what happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. They assumed I'd been spooked by a bear or a pack of coyotes. I didn't correct them. How could I explain what I'd seen when I didn't understand it myself? I continued to run my trapline after that, but things changed. I never went out without my father's .348 Winchester rifle. I started later in the morning when the sun was fully up. And Sadie, my brave, fearless hunting companion, refused to go with me. No amount of coaxing could get her to enter those woods again. She'd sit at the edge of our yard, watching me go with sorrowful eyes, but her paws would not cross that invisible line. But the biggest change was in me. I'd always loved the woods, felt at home among the trees. After that day, I never again felt safe there. That sixth sense that had warned me of danger, I learned to trust it implicitly. To this day, when the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, I don't question the feeling. I react. I've researched what I saw over the years. I've read the accounts of others who've had similar encounters. Some call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others use different names. I don't know what they were, and I don't care to find out. All I know is that they were real, they were intelligent, and for some reason they let me go that day. Sometimes, usually when fall comes around and the air gets that certain crispness, I find myself thinking about those creatures. I wonder if they're still out there in the Minnesota woods, watching and waiting. And I wonder why, when they clearly had me cornered, they chose to let me live. Story 16. I've been sitting on this for years, not really telling anyone outside my family. Figured it's time to finally write it down. Growing up in the middle of nowhere changes you. My childhood home was in this tiny logging community west of Salem, Oregon, a company town that doesn't even exist anymore. There were maybe 500 people total, surrounded by nothing but endless forest in the coastal mountains. We were right at the headwaters of the Cowlitz River, completely cut off from civilization, except for one winding road that connected us to the outside world. Looking back now, it was the perfect place for something to hide. Miles and miles of untouched wilderness, steep ravines, dense forest that hasn't been logged, places humans just don't go. My first encounter happened when I was 6. I remember fragments of it, like a broken dream that still feels real even 25 years later. Our house was this small company-built place, and I shared a room with my 2 older brothers. I had the top bunk by the window because I was the smallest. That night, I woke up to this feeling of being watched. You know that sensation where the hairs on your neck stand up? It was like that, but 100 times worse. I rolled over to face the window, and there it was. A face, not human, looking right at me through the second-story window. We locked eyes, and I just froze. I couldn't even scream. It had this massive head with dark eyes that reflected the moonlight. Its face was flat and wide, covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. The window frame couldn't even contain its whole head. I remember the breath fogging up the glass as it just stared at me. When I finally managed to scream, my brothers woke up and my parents came running. By then, whatever it was had disappeared. My dad grabbed his shotgun and went outside to look around but found nothing. My brothers still remember that night clearly. They saw me paralyzed with fear, saw the foggy handprint on the window that was way too big to be human, but they've always insisted it was just our uncle trying to scare us, climbing up on the roof as a prank. Our uncle always denied it though, said he'd never do something that stupid and dangerous. For years I tried to convince myself they were right, that it was just my uncle or my imagination. I mean, what else could be looking through a second-story window? But then, when I was 11, something happened that none of us could explain away. It was summer, and me and my brothers were riding our bikes on this abandoned logging road about 2 miles from town. Just kid stuff, racing each other, jumping over ruts, the usual. The road hadn't been used in years, so parts of it were pretty overgrown. We came around this bend and had to stop because there was this massive mud puddle blocking the whole road. That's when we saw her, about 30 feet ahead, walking away from us, was this figure. I say her because it looked female somehow. The proportions, the way it moved. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with long arms that hung down past its knees. The whole body was covered in reddish-brown hair, not like fur exactly, more like human hair but all over. The sun was breaking through the trees in this one spot, lighting it up perfectly like some kind of spotlight. My oldest brother whispered, "Holy shit," and that's when it stopped walking. It didn't turn around, just stopped. We all froze. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. My hands were gripping the handlebars so tight they were starting to hurt. For what felt like minutes but was probably just seconds, nobody moved. Then it started walking again, faster this time, and disappeared into the thick brush. The way it moved, it wasn't like a person in a suit. The muscles under the hair shifted naturally, and the legs, the knees bent differently, more like a person's than a bear's. It was bipedal the whole time, walking upright with this smooth, rolling gait. We just sat there on our bikes, not saying anything. Finally, my middle brother said, "That wasn't a bear." And we all knew he was right. We'd seen plenty of bears. Black bears were common in those mountains. This was something else entirely. We raced home, pedaling harder than I've ever pedaled in my life. When we told our parents, my dad got quiet. He didn't dismiss it like I expected. Instead, he said a lot of loggers had stories about wild men in those mountains, places where they refused to work alone. But he told us not to spread it around town because people would think we were making it up for attention. After that day, it was like a switch flipped. Once you see something that's not supposed to exist, you start noticing other things, like how sometimes at night our dogs would go crazy for no reason, barking at the tree line. Or how when we'd go camping, Things would disappear from our campsite overnight. When I was 13, me and my dad went camping up near a place called Bear Creek. We set up our tent in this little clearing about 50 yards from where we parked the truck. Everything was normal until about 2 in the morning when I woke up needing to pee. I slipped out of the tent with my flashlight and walked a little ways into the trees. As I was standing there, I got that same feeling again, that something was watching me. I swept my flashlight around and that's when I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. Not small like a raccoon or a fox, big, person-sized but not quite right. It was moving towards me, reaching out with one long arm. I dropped my flashlight and ran back to the tent, practically diving inside. I woke my dad up, telling him someone was out there. He grabbed his gun and went to look, but again, found nothing. The next morning we found big footprints in the soft ground near where I'd been. My dad took one look at them and decided we were packing up early. The prints were huge, at least 16 inches long, and clearly showed 5 toes. Not a bear, not a human, something else. A year later, we were driving home from my grandparents' house late at night. The road cuts through miles of forest, winding and narrow. My dad was driving slow because it was foggy. We came around this tight corner, and suddenly there was this massive thud against the side of the truck. It shook the whole vehicle, like we'd been hit by another car. My dad slammed on the brakes and we skidded to a stop. When we got out to look, there was a dent in the passenger door the size of a basketball. About 20 feet back on the road was a log, about 4 feet long and thick as my leg. The weird thing, there were no trees overhead that it could have fallen from, no hillside it could have rolled down, just flat forest on both sides. Something had thrown that log at us, hard enough to dent metal. My dad didn't say much, just got us back in the truck and drove way faster than was safe on that road. When we got home, I heard him telling my mom, "Something tried to hit us tonight." She asked if it was kids, and he just shook his head. No kids could throw something that heavy. The incidents kept happening. When I was 15, our school took us to this outdoor education camp about 30 miles from town. We stayed in these rustic cabins with bunk beds. On the second night, a kid in another cabin woke up screaming that something was pulling him through the window. The counselors found him halfway out the window with scratch marks on his arms. They said he must have been sleepwalking, but he swore something had grabbed him. That same week, 3 of us were hiking a trail when we heard this weird knocking sound echoing through the forest, like someone hitting trees with a baseball bat. Our guide got really nervous and hustled us back to camp. Later, I overheard him talking to another counselor about wood knocking and how it wasn't a good sign. By high school, these experiences had changed me. I wasn't the carefree kid I used to be. I'd become hyper-aware in the woods, always scanning the tree line, always listening for unusual sounds. My friends thought I was paranoid, but they hadn't seen what I'd seen. The last major incident happened when I was 17. Me and 4 friends decided to camp at this spot about 10 miles from town, deep in the mountains where there's this natural rock formation that creates a sort of shelter. We set up our tents, built a fire, did all the normal camping stuff. Around midnight, we were still up telling stories around the fire when all the forest noise just stopped. No insects, no frogs, nothing. Just this oppressive silence. Then we started hearing movement in the underbrush surrounding our camp, not just from one direction, but from all around us, like we were being circled. One of my friends threw more wood on the fire to make it brighter. That's when the rocks started, small ones at first, landing near the edge of our campsite, then bigger ones. We couldn't see who was throwing them, but they were coming from different directions, like multiple people were out there. My friend Mike grabbed his flashlight and shined it toward the trees. For just a split second, the beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting back, way too high off the ground to be a deer or a bear. Then they were gone. We spent the whole night huddled by that fire, listening to whatever was out there moving around us, sometimes getting closer, sometimes backing off. At one point, something large stepped on a branch just beyond the firelight, and the crack was so loud it made us all jump. None of us slept. None of us wanted to make a run for the cars, which were parked about a quarter-mile away. When dawn finally came, the forest went quiet again. We packed up faster than I've ever seen anyone break camp and got the hell out of there. On the way to the cars, we found broken branches high up on the trees surrounding our site, like something tall had pushed through. And in one soft patch of ground, a single footprint, just like the ones I'd seen years before. That was my last encounter before I left for college and moved away from the mountains. I haven't been back to camp in those woods since. I've tried researching what I saw, what my family experienced. I know what people call them, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. But those names make it sound like some joke, some campfire story. What we encountered was real, intelligent, and very much not wanting us in their territory. I still can't explain everything that happened. Why did they seem so interested in us? Why did they never attack outright? Were they just curious, territorial? I don't have answers. All I know is that those mountains hide something that most people will never see and probably wouldn't want to. Sometimes I still wake up in the night with that feeling of being watched. And for just a second, I'm 6 years old again, staring into those dark eyes through my bedroom window, unable to scream.